Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Let's hop in. Today is Wednesday, February 8th. Now, I could pretend like I was prepared, smart, and just well organized, and that I'm streaming later today because of the Nintendo Direct, which was really only announced like yesterday. But the truth is, I just overslept. Let's just be honest here. Like, I was awake like 6, 7, 8 in the morning and was thinking maybe I could stream there, but it would have been a nightmare. I would have been half asleep and it just really wouldn't have worked well. So, yeah, insomnia strikes again. Inconsistent sleep schedules. Yep. It's frankly a little shocking I've made it this far in my life without straight up being expelled from school or homeless from unemployment for as much as my sleep schedule has caused trouble all over the place. Although that is the probably number one cause of a lot of trouble in school for kids in the first place is that they've got this ridiculous time schedule of 8 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, in which particularly teenagers should be sleeping in a lot more than that, like waking up perhaps at 10 and starting somewhere around noon for their schools and going later into the evening, or schools in general should just be shorter, which that would be probably a little doable. That certainly was one of my hopes with like homeschooling, that had there been any real desire to reevaluate and rethink how public schooling in general is done, is that they could have optimized things a lot better and get the education parts done while not having to deal so much with the other issues around school. It's like, from what I've experienced and heard from teachers, it's like 90% of teaching is just babysitting and dealing with the one behavior problem kid. If you're homeschooling, you can just say, well, expel them from the class immediately, or just have them not show up in the first place. I think most problem kids, if they just were allowed to basically self-eliminate themselves from the situation, would avoid most conflicts. You're not going to get into fist fights between kids, or even really arguments between kids, if everybody is at home homeschooling. And yes, I do believe at a certain point kids should have some kind of socialization skills that might very well be a thing of the past anyways, because I don't even see the current generation of people really having social skills. So we'll be mostly talking about the Nintendo Direct as far as back to video game news. For the accountability section, briefly, I pretty much have finished Legend of Bumbo, but I made a wrap-up episode and I said I would attach an addendum and just connect the two videos together if I see something else. Legend of Bumbo is broken in the achievements, so it's a weird experience, and being a match 4 game, it's a weird experience in general, because you just kind of don't have anything to say for the 2-hour experience that you have. Even in the Binding of Isaac, that was somewhat of an issue, in that after the initial 60 hours or so of criticism that I might be able to squeak out, everything beyond that is just pretty much silent gameplay, something more akin to a Twitch stream. And I'm fine with making an exception for Binding of Isaac. It's less likely that I would want to make an exception for the Legend of Bumbo as a match 4 game. Legend of Bumbo has considerably less content in it, considerably less variety, considerably less to do. It suffers even compared to just the greed mode added in the latest DLC of Binding of Isaac. I think anybody who really was a huge fan of Legend of Bumbo probably would be better off just playing greed mode or just playing Binding Isaac in general. There is a weird imbalance between the game being mostly not random, but then occasionally throwing in a random thing to screw you over, and that's the only time you'll notice it is when it hurts you, never when it really helps you. You could see the game being 100% puzzle based and getting rid of all the randomness, and that would probably be better for most players. Or you could see the game being completely random. Arguably, it really just should have been a mobile game. It would have been a weird mobile game, certainly, but if it had some kind of ad support to it and it was free, maybe you could get a slightly bigger audience. Probably wouldn't get that much bigger of an audience. But it's kind of pointless of even doing that, but whatever. But then you could also, with maybe consistent ad support, add more content to it, which is kind of what it needs. Or at least have general concepts of dailies happening. And by having those general concepts of dailies happen, you can encourage people to come back to the game over and over again. Whereas as it is set up now, once you've played Legend of Bumbo, honestly, after you've even gotten that first victory and seen the credits, it wouldn't be crazy for to expect that some players would just assume they'd won the game and never play it again in less than 2 hours, which that would be particularly deceptive. Binding of Isaac makes that mistake, in my opinion, too, where your first couple of runs show you credits, and then there isn't anything that just pops up on the screen and says that play more, other than it says the game is now harder, but it doesn't really explain that there's a crypticness to the Binding of Isaac and Legend of Bumbo. But yeah, the most annoying part certainly is that the achievements just didn't unlock, and I'm basically getting all of the achievements. I think I'm getting them all. YouTube suggested me a video around the Dunning-Kruger effect, which, if I can just roughly, poorly explain it, in kind of embodying the Dunning-Kruger effect, it's like the less you know about something, the more confident you are that you do know something about it. So basically, idiots. But the problem with critics and content creators is we almost all, to the letter, have imposter syndrome, and so in watching this video, I was like, maybe I do that sometimes. Honestly, though, the Dunning-Kruger effect is actually a lot of times beneficial. So, instead of knowing what you don't know and then choosing to say nothing, having an opinion, even if it is just confidently not backed by facts, helps people move forward and make the mistakes to learn from the mistakes versus somebody who wouldn't have tried in the first place. Now, ironically, this video, I immediately had to tell YouTube not to suggest it to me, because either in a joke that's not explained or in just a blatant hypocrisy, he attributes the Dunning-Kruger effect to the half in the bag actors. Like, the effect was named after them, and he gives them the wrong names in it as he's showing a picture of it. He's saying that the last name of the two characters on screen in Half in the Bag are Dunning and Kruger, which they aren't. The Dunning-Kruger effect is named after people who filed the paper, the scientists that did the survey or research. Obviously, that makes total sense, right? Particularly, I haven't thought of it too much, and I really wouldn't think of it too much, because I'm just not really that kind of person, I imagine. I don't think I am. But as long as I'm somewhat accurate, and maybe I should be a little bit better accurate about defining my role as a video game critic and as a gamer, like, you could not make an argument to me that I am not a gamer. I think that's fair for most gamers, is that, like, that kind of, if somebody was trying to, like, do gatekeeping or make any kind of argument whatsoever to a gamer that they're not a gamer, it would be really, really difficult to make that argument. I could certainly get into the weeds as far as descriptives. If I knew somebody played solitaire once every 3 months, I could say, well, you're not really a gamer, or you're a very casual gamer, very infrequent casual gamer. I could get into the weeds like that, but even at that, I would say, honestly, if you've played one video game in particular, that's what we usually mean when we say gamer. We don't tend to include people who would exclusively play card games or board games in the real world as gamers, even though those two are gamers. That's not what we mean when we say it. So we already have a shorthand in which we've redefined the term. But yeah, I'd say as long as you've played one game in your life and you plan on playing another, you're a gamer. Now there was somebody famous, I think it was Nick Offerman, who said something about he hates always online games or something, or that he hasn't played a game in over a decade. And I'm like, all right, yeah, people like that say they don't have any intention of playing any future games, those aren't gamers. Joe Rogan, yeah, he was a big esports style gamer for a while there, and then he swore it off because he didn't want him and his team focusing so much time on their gaming habit, which, I mean, he has that whole hustle culture, and he's doing all kinds of other things with all of his times. So, yeah. Particularly you hear of people that tend to have not that much free time swearing off games, and arguably celebrities swearing off games probably do have the free time, but they're doing other things with that time, which is fine. But yeah, to get back to my main point, as long as I define myself as a gamer and as an expert gamer, like, I've been playing video games probably since 1985. Yeah, I imagine that I got the NES the year it came out, that Christmas. So yeah, I've been playing video games since then, and on top of that, I've played what can only be described as a massive amount of games. Now, that doesn't inherently mean I'm good at playing video games. It just means I've played a lot of it and definitely have an experience that is in line with, or more likely severely over, the amount of experience that any other gamer that I would accept using that moniker would have done. On top of which, while I was a Nintendo fanboy for most of my youth and only played Nintendo games well, only own Nintendo games. Actually, I did play some Sega games here and there on occasion, but that was extremely rare occasions. I was actually fairly varied. Like, when I started playing games, we didn't really have a Pokemon-like game. I was actually fairly old when Pokemon came out, so the idea of getting into Pokemon and all the memorabilia and specifically only focusing on like Pokemon games or only focusing on one type of game really wasn't a thing back in 1985 with the NES. You would get any games you could. We would go to rental stores and rent video games. I would play a wide variety of them. I've played a massive amount of games on my YouTube channel. Even my experience, if I just said I started gaming at the beginning of my YouTube channel, which is now I think over 10 years old, like even that experience alone would just be such a much wider variety of games than most I've played. I certainly am not one of the Gamer Bro Microsoft gamers that were effectively created to just play Halo and Madden and maybe NBA 2K and Call of Duty, and that would be their 4 games at most that they would play throughout the entire year. I'm much closer to 12 games a year minimum. And in fact, if I started doing some scheduling, I think I am approaching a pre-recorded footage mark of about a year ahead, 12 months ahead, which would be nice. Maybe I should go another 6 months before I start to think about going back to having 2 pre-recorded stories. We have a Di Sergisa Cyril. I'm not pronouncing that right. He says, hello, do you speak Spanish? Not to any real level. I didn't take any education of that. I do have maybe a little bit of exposure to it, so if you said quite a lot, I could maybe pick out enough key words to understand what you're saying. But if you were to type it specifically, I don't think I would be able to read it. I do know that YouTube has some ambitions, and certainly I have some ambitions to have YouTube videos automatically translate into other languages, and they're working. Linus Tech Tips in particular is working on a technology that would take a voice model to sound like Linus from Linus Tech Tips, and then translate the words into Spanish in a text format, give it to this program, and then the program would speak the words sounding like Linus in Spanish. Inherently, though, for me, I imagine I'll be the last person that works for, or if it ever works at all. I've noticed on the closed captions on the few occasions where I've looked at it on YouTube, they get a lot of words wrong, and my channel definitely cannot afford to hire anybody, let alone somebody specific to just listen to me and then dictate, type everything correctly in the closed captions as to what I'm saying, to then have both the text and the timings of when those words are spoken, because basically you're making a subtitle file at that point, which would be on a DVD or something. But yeah, if I was a super successful YouTuber, and you haven't even seen super successful YouTubers do this yet, I would hire somebody to correct all the subtitles, human type it, make sure it makes sense, and then you would probably have to take that subtitle and hand it to somebody else who could speak a different language. And for every language you're trying to target, Uh, and then after the translation, you would ideally run it through a program so that it would change the audio. And YouTube wants to automate all of that, and they may, in the next 5 years, get that to work for most people, but it's going to get a lot of things wrong. There are probably some sentences I could pick out in Spanish, but not a lot. Like, mostly habla español, and just say no. It would be my response if somebody said habla español. It's like, nope. No, I don't. ¿Dónde está los baños? ¿Dónde está la biblioteca? Things like that you would have seen on TV. That's probably the best. And the curse words, of course. I think I know at least half of all the Spanish curse words. But what does it matter? Once I did it in Spanish, I would need to do it. I would want to do it in other languages. Like, ideally for North America's market, you want Spanish and French, just because of Canada's French language laws. And then if you do Spanish, you probably want to also go to Spain Spanish, and then you potentially want to add German and start going to the European countries. Like, going to the more Asian languages is more difficult to translate to, certainly. A lot of South American and African countries don't have enough internet connected people to justify translating to those languages. A lot of the, like, Norwegian, Swedish countries don't really have enough people to justify that. Speaking of Swedish, PewDiePie is actually pregnant. I actually watched that video. Well, PewDiePie's not pregnant. His wife Marcia is, but I guess that's a phrase that's antiquated at this point. You used to say the man was pregnant, and it was assumed that just meant that the man's wife was pregnant. But nowadays, with such a larger open gender diversity, saying a man's pregnant can mean a lot of different things. What was I talking about? I think I was talking about the Dunning-Kruger effect before then. Yeah. I feel like as long as I am confident, or as long as I'm accurate about saying, hey, I'm a gamer, I have a ton of videos on my channel, like probably over 12,000 hours of videos, very possibly closer to 14 or 15,000 hours of videos on my channel, which that's another thing that would make my channel in particular unlikely to really be able to engage with translating to a different language. There would be so much old footage that would need to be translated. At a certain point, it would be easier to simply have somebody fake being me in a different language, and I imagine people could do that with some of my footage too. Is they could definitely try to edit out the audio that's already there of my voice and then just speak over it in a dub, and particularly Spanish-speaking countries, Central American, South American, even North American, Mexican, that it's not uncommon to have them like turn down the audio on the English speaker and then talk over it on a lot of footage. Since I'm only adding my voice, it would be somewhat easy to to kind of cheat and take the video footage and then talk over it as if you're playing. Although I don't know if there's really a reason to do that. I don't think too many people would find that entertaining or fun to not play a video game just so you can talk over it. Although that is how a lot of like mainstream video game journalists do it, is that they're playing a game or having somebody else play the game for footage, and then they're scripting something out and talking over it for the final edited down presentation. But I think the key difference in doing that almost certainly sits around the fact that you're they are editing things down. If they weren't editing the footage down and they were just doing long plays like I do, they probably wouldn't put in that effort. That certainly is part of the reason why I've been mentally baffled around what I could do with my footage to try and edit it down and go in that more normal direction as far as footage. I just cannot abide the waste of footage that would happen there. Even if mostly what I say is nonsense and pointless drivel, the actual gameplay footage I think is pretty good, and you want to see a game from the beginning to the end for the most part. Although The Legend of Bumbo with just match 4 repetition, cutting that out makes some sense, and that's when I do play things off screen. Okay, we should get into the Nintendo Direct. There's some revelations there, or we should get into the video game news in general. There were some revelations. There were some announcements. It wasn't just like several other Nintendo Directs that we've seen where nothing happens at all. But there was also seemingly either on the Japanese side of the video some demos and things talked about before the show actually started, so there's some things people missed, like Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe demos now available. Bayonetta Origins Horizon Lost Demons has trailer and screenshots. Splatoon 3 Expansion Pass Wave 1 launches this spring. Yep. There's a Disney Illusion Island that was apparently announced. I didn't see anything around that. There's something to be said about Disney Mickey Mouse being drawn this way. Like, I've never seen any of these characters drawn this way, and it's gonna be weird. Like, we've gotta be only a few years away from Disney being public domain, and if anything right now, it does sound like the politics are leaning in such a way that Disney may not be able to actually lobby politicians to somehow expand their copyrights even further. There's definitely no public support for it, and they also spoke out against a Florida's Don't Say Gay bill or whatever they were selling it as that, and so there's now a push to basically take control of all the government control of Disneyland in Florida, or Disney World in Florida. It's Disney World. If it's World, OR, it's in Orlando. If it's Land, LA, it's in LA. Is how you remember that. But yeah, there never should have been government control of a massive... It was swampland, certainly, and still is swampland, but it's ridiculous that the police and the city council and everything are just made up of people who are members of the board of Disney World, and that they are literally casting votes and affecting politics outside of that area. So it's actually a good step in the right direction to say no, a corporation cannot do what Walt Disney literally wanted to do, which was create a isolated splinter government hiding inside of the United States, because that was pretty much what he was thinking of doing. Somehow a near cult leader turned into a animation theme park owner. Let's see. Some of this is WSBC Baseball Power Pros announced for the PS4 and Switch, available now. Gametsu was complaining that they couldn't post on Twitter without it being scheduled, and I don't know why that would be the case. I definitely have seen some complaints about Twitter having trouble, or people doing weird things with Twitter. One of the YouTube persons I follow said they got their account hacked, and then it seems like they've once again gotten their account hacked. And it's interesting what people did with his YouTube channel, in that they have removed all of his videos, changed the name, changed the icon, made it look like it's a Tesla channel, and lost him massive amounts of subscribers because people are seeing this Elon Musk Tesla channel that they didn't subscribe to, with like Elon Musk Tesla videos being published on it. Yeah. And I'm not sure the YouTuber knows how he got his account hacked for real, but he heavily suspected it was because somebody offered him a sponsorship deal with an app that was allegedly a game, and then the app actually was a virus that Microsoft did not catch that allowed them to steal credentials and open Windows on his computer and hack his YouTube channel, even with two-factor authentication enabled. And of course, YouTube is always held useless in almost every situation. But I will warn people, if you do start to see a Tesla channel on your subscription feeds, that, or something weird like that, that may be what's going on. Might as well just plug the guy. He's not a gamer YouTuber anyways. His name is Paul Hibbert, I think, and he just talks about like smart home animations and does a bunch of, I think they're funny skits. They're fairly repetitive, repeating the joke every video, but fairly frequent videos, so that's probably why they feel a little repetitive. But yeah. So we have a Gametsu article here. Disney Illusion Island launching July 28th. Jump into an all-new Mickey and Friends adventure. Almost certainly there have been depictions of Mickey Mouse in this way. I imagine there have been some comics or even comic strips where they were depicted this way, and that this is kind of a visual reference to that. But it definitely is not the Mickey Mouse. Interesting. Guess we could just do this and stack even more things. I didn't realize that if you got to a second turn here, you could do that. I don't know if it particularly benefits me to have all the Zodiac characters stacked even more, so you have like a 7 stack. If I had a card that said if you can stack a bunch of cards together, you would win, that would be a different experience. And he was setting up for a Mirror Force. Mirror Force that will not come. I didn't play that right. I could have summoned so much more with this. Oh well. Go ahead and risk setting a trap, or pretend to set a trap. So what does Land of Illusion look like? Looks like it's just a platforming game. If anything, talking about how I played games in 1985, it's like we've just gone full circle, and maybe Cuphead inspired the development of a game like this, and that's why it's coming out now. But there always should have been other mascots platforming games out there. The fact that Mario has managed to dominate the 2D platforming market when 2D platforming was all you really could do in the NES era, and has managed to somehow dominate the 3D market when Mario 64 came out, is kind of a shame. Like, to the point where I really can only recommend Mario games when I'm talking platformers. For the most part, puzzle platformers, collectathon platformers, or just platformers in general. And if you're going to have any other kind of platforming aspects, it has to be something along the lines of a Metroidvania game before you start to get into enough of a difference that I might recommend it again. Yeah, and I don't particularly care too much about the baseball game. These baseball games I think are particularly popular in Japan. What's funny though about this Nintendo Direct is, as we'll see in the news, you don't get... Nintendo's not really getting a great benefit from doing this Nintendo Direct now, after they've already announced that their sales are down. I guess maybe they couldn't get the announcements out before enough trading could have happened to affect the sales numbers. Honestly, I would suspect that their sales numbers are a month behind at least. Anyway, so unless they had done the Nintendo Direct 2 or 3 months earlier in late 2022, they probably couldn't have affected the sales quarter. But really, that's what they should have done. Everything that was announced today should have been announced before Black Friday or right after Black Friday, or 15 days before Christmas, or right out on Christmas. Yeah. you could do some real manipulation and say we're going to make a Christmas Nintendo Direct and then talk about a whole bunch of games to get hyped about for the next year, because none of those games are going to be available to be purchased. That being said, there is a few games that are available and demos that are available today, so that's why they're having it the Direct now. And yeah, they really wouldn't have had that much to announce if it was just games getting a launch date. Going through the Video Games Chronicle articles, Nintendo says it's not planning to switch a Switch price cuts as its console enters uncharted territory. The company plans to grow Switch's 122 million install base with new and classic titles, is the quote. The fact that you have 122 million is surprising. It's a big number, to say the least. But it also highlights that even the best games can hope to sell only 20 million, so you're talking 5 out of every 6 players only buying any specific game, where ideally you would have wanted almost everybody to have a Switch to have purchased Mario Odyssey and some of the bigger titles, Zelda Breath of the Wild, things like that. But I think what you quickly would realize if you started to investigate it and look at the math is that you could probably pretty easily get rid of half of the sales of the 120 millions as a second Switch that's just sharing games between 2 kids. Probably divide it by 2.5, closer than half. So I would say that would bring it down to 60 million. Add another half there. That would get it down to potentially 30 million. Yeah, 40 million. Let's round up and say 40 million are legitimate first household Switch purchases compared to second or third Switch purchases, or replacements because of broken ones, which let's be honest, a lot of that would happen too. That gets to a more reasonable estimate of how many households have one or more Switches, which is a very different statistic than just saying we have sold or made 122 million accounts. Installed base is a rough to define term, I suppose. Why can I not activate this? I was hoping to activate this and toss this and turn this around. But yeah. They're saying this is uncharted territory. I guess in part the argument is Nintendo has never solely focused on one console, and nobody, including Nintendo, has had to deal with COVID and part shortages and just a poor Japanese economy, which even if the Japanese economy doesn't really affect the financials as so much in Nintendo, it will massively affect how a Japanese company like Nintendo thinks and plays. Here's an interesting number. They say 994 million Switch games have been shipped since the console launched in 2017, which, if you have 122 million and you divide that into 999, you're talking 9 games potentially per Switch sold have been shipped, not particularly sold. There's that's not an apples to apples comparison, certainly. But it's an interesting thought, is that their ambitions, at least, are to sell 9 games to people. And yeah, I could see that too. Like, Switch games aren't cheap, Switches aren't cheap, certainly, but there is a shortness of Switch games compared to a lot of PC games I've played, where you really are going to burn through a lot of Nintendo games. This guy is doing some kind of weird strategy where he's either trying to run out of cards, or I just picked the only one creature he has in the entire deck. And he's now able to special summon something. This is an interesting strategy that, if I cared more about this game, I would investigate further. But I don't, so whatever. I'm still playing my favorite waifu collectathon gacha game, Destiny Child, even as we speak. Just trying to get all of the highly time-consuming daily actions done. Yeah, I used to be irritated that I didn't have enough stamina or enough to do with Destiny Child, but at this point they've gone so far in the other direction that most cases there's too much to do, and it's, I imagine, a pretty delicate balance as far as just how much content you really want in a game like that. Go ahead and add that to my hand, I guess. Summon this. See if that activates anything. This guy has like 9 cards. So his strategy may very well just not work. Very good. Negate it, take control of it. Alright, you want to play that way? We'll see what else we can do. Yeah, for some reason I cannot toss that card. So now he's putting 3 runic quick play spell cards at the bottom of the deck, so that would explain why he would want to get rid of his deck. Let's see. I don't know what happened there that put cards in his hand. This is just like master deck manipulation. Tri-Brigade, fuck tail, tall. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says new Xbox Game Pass titles for the console, PC, and cloud have been announced. Madden 23, Atomic Heart, and SD Gundam among February's first wave. We may have already covered this list, or this may just be a new list. This is one of those, it is news, but it's not news that I particularly care about, since I'm just not willing to go down the route of Game Pass. I actually would like to buy an Xbox Series X, or even an Xbox One, but I just want it as a Blu-ray player, so it would be a very weird. It'd have to be like a good deal somehow, and yeah. Ideally, at the moment, if I could buy a like scratch and dent, slightly used Xbox One as a Blu-ray player, that would probably be fine. I doubt it would lose support for any kind of Blu-ray 4K HD playback that might exist for a good long time. It would replace my PlayStation 3, which is too old at this point. Let's see. Moving on in the stories, UK regulators suggest removing Call of Duty from Microsoft Activision's Blizzard acquisition. In its provisional conclusion, the CMA says Xbox Activision deal could harm players. Quote, could harm. This is the UK's Competition and Markets Authority, CMA, not to be confused with the Communication Workers of America union that has said A-OK to the Activision Blizzard acquisition by Microsoft. Which, yeah, names are easily confused with when you have these initialisms. I don't think Microsoft would be 100% opposed to this. Like, inherently, I'm not sure what Microsoft's real goal is as far as the Activision Blizzard deal, other than my suspicion that it is corporate protectionism, and it's just trying to support Bobby Kotick, or it's trying to save itself in the fact that I wouldn't be surprised if Microsoft has quite a few shares of Activision Blizzard, and they just can't allow that company to go bankrupt, as it were. Like, I don't know if Microsoft really cares that much about Call of Duty. I don't know if you look at the acquisitions that Microsoft has made before this point, if this is not the Xbox One, Xbox 360 era in which they're just trying to get another first-person shooter Halo game on their console as an exclusive. If anything, I would say when you look at the kind of lack of success of Crackdown 3, which is also kind of more of a like Gamer Bro type game, like I would think that would push Microsoft away from just trying to have one more of that. And or more recently, the kind of obvious failure of Halo Infinite and having to start over there. Like the Activision Blizzard acquisition could very well be just to get talented people who could turn around Halo and save the day there. I think since we have a lot of news today, we'll stop playing. We've gone for nearly an hour. But yeah, you don't acquire Double Fine and then release Psychonauts 2. We have somebody on the chat named Dixby saying hello. Hello, Dixby. You don't acquire ZeniMax and release games like Doom and Prey and Skyrim. Like, none of those are your standard Halo type games. So yeah, I kind of suspect that if that's what it takes, Microsoft would be more than happy to agree to those terms. Of course, they don't want to agree to that term and then lose another game by another country's requirements and lose another game by that company's requirements. Like, if all of a sudden they said you can't have Diablo, you can't have Fallout. Well, they already own Fallout. No, you can't have Diablo. If you can't have StarCraft, they haven't even done anything with StarCraft in a long time. If you can't have Hearthstone, if you can't have Heroes of the Storm, I think it's basically been shut down at this point. World of Warcraft. Yeah, if they there honestly would be a bigger argument about the World of Warcraft being lost, and that's just under the Blizzard products. I'm sure there's some other Activision products. If every single major title was not allowed to be acquired, then that I'm not sure Microsoft would want to do that. On the other hand, I'm not sure that it isn't actually the exact opposite situation where Microsoft wants to acquire the rights to the games and wants to basically lay off everybody and just fire all the bad employees and all the troubling employees in management, in particular in Activision Blizzard. That's what I would want to do if I acquired the company. Is I'd be like, all right, we're gonna acquire all of this, and then within less than a year, we're getting rid of Bobby Kotick. We're gonna do everything to not pay out a golden parachute to him, and we're getting rid of all of the managers that are accused of inappropriate behavior, and maybe we'll keep 30-40% of the employees, low-level employees that don't have any like problems associated with them, but you really can't even believe anything that like HR at Activision Blizzard said, as far as them potentially lying about people saying that they did things they didn't do or covering up things that people did do. So you probably just have to re-interview everybody on day one and then have a tight look at them with your Microsoft HR department and have a trigger finger to eliminate anybody who's going to be a problem. Implement some major rules. Game companies in general need some major rules as far as, let's not encourage people to go out and socialize and be friends with their co-workers. Let's not encourage people to have late night meetings with small groups of people, 2 or less, or even 3. 3 or less. Let's not encourage alcohol consumption in any way, or drug use in any way. Ideally, the work from home concept as far as game development could have worked, I think, fairly well. Work from home, maybe come in on a meeting if you can once a week. Might be the maximum you need. Moving on with the news. Kingdom Hearts HD 1.2 and 2.5 remake soundtracks are now on Spotify and Apple Music. You'd look at this art, and I don't think Kingdom Hearts ever looked like this, as far as this promo art. It's kind of weird. And at a certain level, if you were to remake all of the Kingdom Hearts and just have a flat 2D animation appearance like this, it might have worked a little bit better. But yeah, there's kind of some deception even in this, in that I don't feel like Sora gets the girl very much for very long ever, or is potentially chasing after her from the beginning of the first game and never gets anywhere close to that. And then even just getting Mickey and Donald as assistive characters takes way too long. Yeah. If anything needs a remake, it is long, like ridiculous RPG games, like the Kingdom Hearts games, which have already made remakes, but like just a full reboot that would accelerate the entire story of nonsense and try to do something that is more reasonable and more playable. They're pointing out that the 2 albums last a combined 6 hours with 187 tracks on offer, so they must be fairly short tracks at that, though. Nintendo briefly listed Zelda Tears of the Kingdom for $70 on the eShop. I believe this has been kind of confirmed. So Nintendo is not planning on making a new console or announcing a new console, and they're raising the prices, which that is using that uncharted territory term to an extreme at this point. I cannot justify anybody raising their prices up to $70 because people aren't making more money. If anything, people are making less money. Fewer people are working than ever at all, let alone getting raises and getting paid more. Yep. And unless something weird happens, I just don't expect anything and people to get paid more unless we get like universal basic income or something. There is definitely some concern that the United States government once again is going to argue and default on its debt for a few weeks and go into like a government shutdown, which would hurt not only the economy in the United States but pretty much everywhere in the world. Of course, it doesn't really mean that as much as a lot of people speak on it. Yeah. So, I don't want to get into a big economics rant, but I can certainly say $70 is too much for a Switch game. Even $60 for most Switch games is too much. Most Nintendo games are shorter than they should be. They should be at a discount of $50. And that would be a great selling point, certainly, too, is that the games are cheaper. And certainly, in the shadow of the stock prices selling 7.5% after the latest financial results. Now, some of this also just bears down on the aspect that investors are insane, and the concept of investing is insane, and this is just the latest of late stage capitalism, in that every company's investors are expecting more and more profits every single quarter, and the only way they've even been able to appease these rabid greedy hordes that are investors is to adopt what is called GAAP, the generally accepted accounting procedures, and all that means really is you just lie. It's basically lies. There's no other way to say it. No real accounting is happening there. You're excluding a significant amount of your debt and your investment to make it look like you're way more profitable than you are. All money is made up, but when you have a system on top of a system where the made up money is getting made up a second time, I mean, it just becomes basically a pyramid scheme where as soon as that one keystone or linchpin on the pyramid scheme tumbles, the whole thing falls down like a house of cards. I'm mixing my metaphors there. But also they announced that they were going to increase the pay of the employees in Japan at Nintendo, which is also potentially why the stocks went down 7.5%, is because they're unhappy that the shareholders are unhappy that people are getting paid more to fight the inflation in Japan. Hogwarts Legacy came out and it broke a Twitch record on first day of early access. This one has been fairly controversial in the sense that people have been trying to make it controversial, but the actual gamers, instead of video game critics and SJWs who don't actually like or play video games, seem to really want to watch the game. Maybe there's a lot of hate watching, you could argue too, but I think a lot of people just want to play it, and I can't blame people for that. It's like, enjoy what you want to enjoy, certainly. There might be an interesting comparison, and I don't really have time to think about it like this, as far as like something like Song of the South, where I doubt very many people saw Song of the South when it came out and want to see it because they have some great love of it and want to like re-enjoy the aspects that they enjoyed with that when they saw it when they were a kid. Almost certainly the case here is that people who want to see Song of the South is because it's historically relevant. Like first it was like the first black actor to win, like, I think an Emmy or an Oscar, that character, and it introduces several interesting songs that are still played today. So it being hidden away and never re-released by Disney is erasing of the history, and people don't like that. But Harry Potter, in contrast to that idea, which that wasn't even a very good idea in the first place, Harry Potter is things people grew up with, and they don't care about J.K. Rowling. They don't care if she's a trans exclusionary feminist. I don't know why you say radical feminist just to get turf out of that, when feminism has always been a radical, quote unquote, movement, and it has to be a radical movement to be effective in any way. First generation feminists were radicals, second generation feminists are radicals, and third generation feminists should be radicals. But yeah, people don't care about her views, political views. I would suspect she probably put out some right in line with your average UK citizen's conservative political views at the start, and then started getting bullied on Twitter and just kept doubling down and doubling down and doubling down. Now, I'm sure that's how most people eventually get to the point where they're just straight up trolling people with comments, which is what it seems like J.K. Rowling is doing now. That being said, while J.K. Rowling may be trans exclusionary, there seems to be, I saw a story, a trans character that you meet within the first few hours of Hogwarts Legacy, and she had no involvement with this game. And people don't care about any of that, though. They just want to play Harry Potter and envision, experience Harry Potter that they grew up with in a good video game, because there's been a lot of bad video games, and there is still a lot of love for Harry Potter, in the same way that there was a lot of love for The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, if anything. Yeah, I didn't hear that the main character was trans. Mark Claudio's on the chat. He says his first comment was, "You think game systems lost value due to simulators?" I think, unless there's a different kind of simulator you're talking about, simulators themselves are just a game system in those games. So, like, when you're talking like city skylines, that would be a city simulator, and there's tons of game systems inside of that, as far as just balancing things. Or The Sims is a person simulator, and there's a decent number of systems in that. But if you're talking any other game that isn't a simulator, I think game systems overall have not been affected by simulators at all. Like, the game systems in something like God of War Ragnarok, for instance, which is probably more of a RPG hack and slash beat 'em up game, those game systems almost certainly not affected by simulators. Anyways, Mark's second thing is, you heard the yeah, I heard the main character is trans. Who cares? I don't think it's the main character. I think it is just somebody you meet at Hogwarts. Uh, I think the main character is a character you build yourself in Hogwarts Legacy, so you can be anything you want. Like the ones that download whole games. Yeah, I'm not following you, Mark. Sorry. Like, are you talking like people stealing games and then putting them on sale on Steam? That still really wouldn't lose value. Yeah, I'm not really following the thought there. All right, let's move on with the news, though. Yeah, people seem to be wanting to see Hogwarts Legacy, and I imagine we'll get more of that. I guess the real question is this a long tail game that people play, or is it just a peak game? Do people actually pay and play for this game, or do they watch other people play it? Do they play it long enough? Does it have a good 6-week to 6-month launch window? And does it make enough profits for whoever owns WB Games at the moment to potentially continue to support Hogwarts Legacy and do something more with it? Yeah. I'd also was thinking, when you think about The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, there was certainly a problem once they started to stretch the Hobbit book, which was a fairly short book, into 3 movies and rush those 3 movies out as sequels to the highly successful Lord of the Rings movies. And that created, I think, an oversaturation in the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit content past a point where people who may have been interested were willing to go. The fandom for the Lord of the Rings in particular is almost certainly always was smaller than Harry Potter, because the generation of kids that would have read The Hobbit as kids or Lord of the Rings as kids are probably approaching 70 or 80 at this point. So you've missed out on that audience just because of the timing, whereas the generation that would have grown up playing Harry Potter now are in the 20s and 30s. But yeah, the Lord of the Rings in particular has never really been able to regain a fandom or get a second generation of fans to come about since basically the Hobbit movies. And they're trying, certainly. There's the Golem game that keeps getting delayed by Daedalic. There was the Lord of the Rings prequel Amazon Prime videos that nobody liked. The only Lord of the Rings games that are even slightly good, in my opinion, are the Lego Lord of the Rings games and Lego Hobbit games, and those aren't even good. They're actually some of the worst Lego games that were made. So then you just have Shadow of Mordor 1 as the only Lord of the Rings game that sold particularly well, and then they ruined that with microtransactions too. It seems like it's a repeated mistake that they feel like the Lord of the Rings universe can be monetized way further than it really can, whereas in comparison, Harry Potter has proven itself very successful at monetizing it. And perhaps that's because it's a little bit closer to the real world, in that there is a real world and a Muggles world. It's more kid friendly. It has a lot more variety of what it's doing, whereas Lord of the Rings is just hobbits and wizards and walking around, talking, singing songs, writing poems, things that aren't super popular. Moving on. The BioShock creator Ken Levine's new game now has an official launch window. This is a great example of bending over backwards in your headline by Video Games Chronicle to just clickbait tag as much as possible. The name of this game is Judas. So the right way to do this would be to say Judas now has an official launch window, or at the very least you would say Judas from Ken Levine now has an official launch window. This is also a great example of just the video game development community, video game creators, trying to create these superhero type characters like Ken Levine, and Ken Levine probably trying himself to make himself feel like he's a superhero creator that does all the work to make games and does a great job around that. The truth is, this is a game being made by a team at Ghost Story Games, a team that has had some people, including Ken Levine, that worked on Bioshock 1, did not make Bioshock 2 at all, worked on Bioshock Infinite, and arguably Bioshock Infinite was not as well received, and it definitely was not well designed. It took forever, and there's a major delays. And the fact that you have to lean on Bioshock, which is a game that's probably well over 10 years old, to sell your new game is kind of a shame, in that he just hasn't made enough products. Judas itself looks very much like a Bioshock in space, and they do tend to focus on magic in the left hand, gun in the right hand gameplay, and then telling a weird story around that, and that seems to be it. Basically, he's making an basically he's making an anthology around weird stories with the same gameplay, almost variations on the same theme. Okay, Mark has named something here, so I'm gonna just go into blurred mode, since that's all I have here, and we'll see what this is, because I don't know this game, and this is either somebody clickbaiting me into going somewhere or talking about something I've never heard of. Yeah. This probably is just spam, if anything. I think I may just be being pushed to advertise something here for free. Alright, well, he mentions this device, and I'm gonna not name the name or anything here. It seems to me like this is one of these emulator physical hardware devices, and that's what he's saying are emulators, although the emulators really would be the software, and so this really is just a handheld device, and honestly it doesn't look amazingly great as far as the hardware. I've seen tons of these, and most of these are garbage devices and not really worth purchasing, particularly when you compare it to the Steam Deck. The prices for these they used to be competitive before the Steam Deck came out, but they totally aren't. This runs on Android, but Android 11. These types of things really do not in any way compare to playing your traditional console games. Yeah, you can see there's another one here that looks like a Game Boy. These tend to be pretty bad garbage products, and this is not a company that immediately jumps out. Now, arguably, this might be better than, say, one of the devices you put a Raspberry Pi in. But all of these devices have become completely useless, and just not something you really would want to buy nowadays instead of a Steam Deck. Spend the extra money, get a Steam Deck, be able to play a lot more modern games on the Steam Deck, and then also install emulators to play old games on that. So, looking over at the chat, the first thing was, yeah, he was calling them simulators first, not emulators. I guess that was a typo. The first question was, you think game systems lost value due to these emulator type hardware things? No, I do not. I do not think for a second somebody goes into a store and even sees these devices available, at least in the countries that matter, like Japan or the United States or Europe or North America. That you just don't even see these types of devices. You might see these for like very cheap NES emulator versions of these that are like $10 at a grab and go line at a store, but there's just no comparison there. Parents aren't that stupid. Most parents I would assume most parents are pretending to be that stupid if they're going to buy a $10 NES clone, Famicom clone type device and say that's as good as the Switch. Kids know a Nintendo Switch when they see it, and they're not going to buy something different just because. Kids also know what their friends have. Kids know what Xboxes and PlayStations look like. So yeah, I don't think you're losing any sales to that at all. Maybe Nintendo is losing a few sales from its eShop due to emulation, but in all fairness, Nintendo does not deserve a single dime for its emulation on its eShop at this point. They haven't done good emulations themselves on the Switch, and they aren't giving any extra value whatsoever through the eShop. You're better off emulating an old NES game to have better implemented features as far as like pausing, rewinding, save states, retro achievements, different filters, visual filters, frame borders, things like that. You can just get very much into the weed emulating old games, and you just can't do that on the Nintendo Switch. Whereas PlayStation is only really emulating PS1, PS2, and PS3 games, and that's really on a game-by-game basis. And Xbox is very possibly not technically emulating much of anything because their backward compatibility from Xbox One to the Xbox Series X is fairly solid. So just sticking an Xbox One game disc into an Xbox One X, maybe that would work, maybe it wouldn't. But typically, if you do stick a disc in, they don't even bother to technically emulate it. They just have a new version that they have made a lot of times that you download when you put in an old disc. Yep. But Mark, if you are in the market looking for a device like this, get a Steam Deck. That's all I can say. Is like, as the only recommendation at the moment is get a Steam Deck. They've announced that they aren't releasing a new hardware standard or improvement for the Steam Deck for a while, at least this year. So you're very safe to get a Steam Deck right now. They might put out a version 2 that's just better built, but But yeah, and you can certainly go on Google and see people talking about Emu Deck, EMU DECK, I believe. I think that is the most popular way to get everything in the same Steam library on the Steam Deck, as far as emulating specific games that you want to have their own posters and launch icons. And if you're trying to go for a more like complete collection of games that you're emulating, you can just install RetroArch on Steam. It's free. All the cores are free. It's maybe a little bit of an older version, but that just increases stability. And yeah, or otherwise you can also jump through some hoops and install Emulation Station as its own separate app on Steam Deck, and then you can use Emulation Station as a front end to RetroArch, and so then there would only be one icon that says Emulation Station on your Steam Deck. You click on that, then it takes you into the interface of Emulation Station, and then you can spend hundreds of hours if you want organizing everything. The thing about emulation, certainly though, is the biggest time sink is not actually going to be playing the games for most people. It's going to be trying to organize and label the files right if you're trying to get a complete collection. Now, if you are literally just want to go back and play like Super Mario Brothers and that's your only game, that'll take you probably 5 minutes. But if you want to have all 700 plus NES games that were released, I think it was about 700, that's a much bigger thing. And I've seen some people that try to sell hard drives with the let's just say illegal, most countries say they're illegal ROMs on them, where you can just buy the hard drive and everything is all set up. I haven't actually dealt with any of those hard drives, but it does seem like that might be a way to get a good start. Also, you'll start to run out of space fairly quickly, though, if you're trying to do that on the Steam Deck. So you probably would want at least 6 to 8 terabyte hard drives, external hard drives, to have big collections of games once you start getting into PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 games. And some of the newer things maybe won't run on the Steam Deck particularly well. But smaller NES games, Super NES games, those are all tiny files by modern standards. But even at that, your Steam Deck, you get the cheapest Steam Deck, you're only going to have 256 gigs, and 80 of that is going to be taken up by one big modern game. And then I wouldn't be surprised if 120 of your 256 is taken up by the operating system itself on a Steam Deck. Moving on with the news. Here's the story I was talking about before. Nintendo is raising its employees' base salaries by 10% in Japan. So, if anything, if you're a company and you announce that you're raising the base salaries of all your employees by 10%, which honestly, they were underpaying their employees quite a bit, and there was a story about that over the last year, a few months ago, I think, about how Nintendo employees in particular were underpaid because they were using the people who like Nintendo and have the passion of Nintendo and abusing them by underpaying them in comparison to other game developers in Japan and in the same region. A lot of people, if not most people in Japan, I think are underpaid. There's certainly a level that if people were paid a little bit more, then they would be more confident. They would start to develop some backbone to not work as much and get rid of their cultural acceptance of overworking and sleeping in the office and that being a sign of showing commitment to the company. And that's the thing Japan needs to destroy as part of their cultures. In fact, Japan as a society is going to have to destroy a significant amount of its culture, which, yeah, you destroy your own culture, then there may be a country called Japan, but it may be full of people that don't look Japanese at all and aren't even genetically connected to the Japanese. Although that does happen. Wouldn't be the first time that an island country gets just completely replaced with a different group of people. The United States, not that many Native Americans around. They're definitely not the people in charge anymore. The subheading here is, it's important for our long-term growth to secure our workforce. This is the new president for Furukawa. So the fact that he's doing anything different is actually an amazingly good sign, because the traditional thing in Japan is that you'll have an 80-90-year-old CEO of a company like Nintendo being a 100-year-old company plus, and then the 80-90-year-old CEO will appoint a 70-year-old new CEO to replace him, who he's been grooming most of his entire career to replace as a replacement, and that replacement, out of respect for the old CEO and the old ways of things being done, does the exact same thing. It's extremely conservative in the sense that they don't want anything to change at all. People certainly watch a lot of anime in the wild and crazy thoughts and depictions in anime, and they think that, and they get the mistake that the Japanese people are in any way liberal or progressive, or like I'd say progressive is probably the better term there, and that they would embrace change or embrace new ideas or different things, and it's exactly the opposite. Japanese people will embrace those ideas in stories and entertainment as almost, this is so wild and fictional that it couldn't possibly happen in reality in our society. But they as a culture, they are extremely stuck in tradition and don't want to make any changes at all, particularly in the workforce culture. Moving on, Mario Kart Live home circuit studio Velen has revealed a Hot Wheels mixed reality racing game. So it looks to me like this is just the exact same thing as the Mario Kart concept, Mario Kart Live home circuit, except for now it's just Hot Wheels themed, which, I mean, it's not the worst thought, I guess, to make a second revision and have Hot Wheels instead of Mario on it, but it does seem like it's selling exactly the same thing. Maybe the cars are slightly better designed, maybe the technology has been improved. Oh, here's the part I'm missing here. Hot Wheels Rift Rally is coming to the PlayStation consoles and iOS devices in March. So it is the same company that made Mario Kart Live home circuit. It's the same studio, Velen, which maybe it should have said makers of Mario Kart Live reveal a Hot Wheels mixed reality racing game for PS, PlayStation, and iOS. So now it's coming to a different market. Yeah, okay. That makes a little bit more sense. If this was just a Hot Wheels branded, but you still can only play it with a Nintendo Switch product, I was about to complain that there are no ramps or bumps or anything extra that they're adding here. But I guess I could still make that complaint. That you see, like, there's a pencil here, and a lot of the real world elements would be the ramps and bumps you build yourself, but it feels like there should be something else besides just 4 stations and 1 car. Even the 1 car seems seems to be a mistake, but it's probably pretty expensive. I was trying to think, and this was a wild thought. If you had real world cars that somehow had a power transfer or even a magnetism in the front and the back of their car that repelled the front and the back of things in front of us, I wonder. I was thinking, would there be a way that a car could speed up and then get behind the car and then push the car without colliding with the car and actually touching the car to make it speed up also? Although inherently that would be incredibly dangerous if you could only safely drive a car at 20 miles per hour and then there's somebody late for work behind you and they're speeding up with 100% confidence that they're going to push your car with them driving 60 up to 60. Plus, if you're trying to look for your turn or the right street and you're getting accelerated, that would be dangerous. Or if they're pushing you into the middle of an intersection when there's a stoplight, a technology like that, if something could happen like that, and I'm talking like a actual property of physics type thing where you could speed up the car in front of you, and arguably why not also slow down the car behind you. That's probably the better technology, is if there was some kind of, I don't know, flywheel or something, or gear system that everybody was on a track, and when somebody was about to collide with you, their car disengaged their accelerators and just spun in the same position or slowed down. It'd almost certainly be technology. But yeah, a technology to slow down somebody behind you so they don't hit you is 100% better than a technology to force the person in front of you to move faster. Of course, all of that technology will probably be eliminated when we have true self-driving cars and everybody is just communicating with everybody, and you don't need stoplights at that point if it's just 100% automated. That has nothing to do with video games though, so I don't need to ramble. Yeah, sometimes I just have a thought in my head and I spend too much time on it. Don't ever let me start talking about how much time I've tried to figure out, or how much time I've spent trying to figure out how to 3D print food like a replicator. Actually did see a video about talking about replicators and how the general concept you'd assume how a replicator works probably uses a massive amount of power, even based on having a warp core in a starship on Star Trek to generate the replicators, to the point where there have been episodes where they've had to tell the people to stop using the replicators so much because they were low on power. Moving on back to video games news. Video Games Chronicle says Bobby Kotick has warned the UK risks becoming Death Valley if it blocks the Microsoft deal. Claims the regulators are confused about who's competing with who in games. I would say the UK in particular risks becoming Death Valley already, and has just adopted that risk with Brexit, to maybe get a little political here, but I don't know how many people are positive on Brexit at this point. It was definitely, I will give them some slack, but as to some of the reasonings why they did Brexit, but it did not work out well for them economics wise. Yep. It is probably the first example we've ever seen of a country trying to get away from more free trade, more world trade, in favor of more tariffs and more isolationism. And yeah, there never really was that many video game companies in the UK anyways. There's some small ones, certainly. I would say maybe 5 to 10 names that you'd actually recognize. There's several offices of more international companies that have offices in the UK, but actually doing business in the UK and that being your main office doesn't make the most sense. I think the makers of that Senua's Sacrifice game, I think they're in the UK. And they're talking about the UK here, so that includes all the British Isles and England and like Australia too. But even if you include Australia and even Canada as being part of the UK, Canada is the only country that has the biggest amount of game companies, and most of the Canadian game companies are secondary studios anyways. Like Gearbox Montreal is an example there. Yep. And anything the UK does right now to piss off companies like Activision Blizzard, he's basically just vowing revenge as far as he's going to leave, take his toys and leave, and it will be better for the United States and other countries, economic competitors. Now the one reason I would say Brexit, not to get too political here, did make some sense is now that you see the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, if there was a trigger at some point where the European Union decided to defend the Ukraine and send troops from all of its member states of the European Union into Ukraine, and the UK didn't want to be a part of that, that's the one reason why they wanted to keep their sovereignty and not be a part of the European Union, for that one reason. That, and they didn't want to be forced to take on a ton of migrants, immigrants, and displaced people, which, yeah, I can see that really hasn't worked out well for anybody. It never really does. It's just a natural part of the world, but it never works out well. Moving on. Video game news. 9 minutes of Star Wars Jedi Survivor gameplay has been revealed at Video Games Chronicles, if you want to check that out. Atari is selling a 50th anniversary box set of 10 Atari games for $1,000, which is insane. It's worth pointing out, Atari is not the Atari of old. Atari went bankrupt. Somebody bought the name to Atari and the rights to the games. They were trying to make a new Atari console, and that is basically vaporware. It just has not been made and sold. And now they're trying to sell Atari games for $100 each. These games may have cost somewhere close to the equivalent of $60 when they came out as first generation games before the NES, but in their actual cost of what they would have been sold as, they would have been sold as like $20 games at most, and these games are incredibly simple and not worth it. Even if each one of these is supposed to be a $100 limited edition collector set, which is, I guess, what the idea here is, what I'm seeing here, even just from this picture, it's not worth $100, and most limited edition collector sets are not worth $100. Yeah, hopefully nobody buys this. This is the kind of collectible garbage that needs to go away. It doesn't benefit anyone. And yeah, when you start to talk about emulation, it is totally one step closer to being acceptable to just steal and emulate these games if you want to play them, when somebody is only selling them as for $1,000. I don't even know if this really includes the games. Hmm. Hmm. There's only 100 units that they're even selling, so they're trying to make $1 million uh, off of 100 units. These are special light up cartridges when the console is turned on, so they actually are the cartridges, but they aren't the original games. And so you could probably just search eBay right now for what would a used copy of Adventure cost on eBay and get it for $10-$20. If you wanted the original cartridge, you can get the ROM for free. None of these games are worth playing anyways. Moving on, Microsoft has revealed and launched the Stellar Shift Xbox Series X controller. It's a color shifting controller with a dynamic background that I guess you download, so I guess you're now getting digital extras for buying physical hardware. That's better than getting mostly physical extras when basically buying digital software, which is what you usually get in a limited edition like game sales. It's mostly a bunch of things that you're probably not going to put on a shelf or put on a wall. As somebody who has a fancy shelf full of anime, well, actually nearly 2 full shelves of anime, 2 full bookshelves of anime to the left of me, and it's designed fancy and all, I have to fully admit that it's not something most people do or have space for. The anime I have is very old, and I have not played any of the DVDs. I barely have any Blu-rays at all in over 10 years. And I have never done that kind of decorating with any video game thing at all. I've never loved a video game that much that I would want to put it on a shelf and display it. I've never done it with game cartridges or game cases. Video game cases in particular are not pretty when you look at their spine. Anyways, they don't line up. They tend to just be very redundant and repetitive things. They've made the Blu-ray cases so tiny and thin for video games anyways. There's not any real physical space to make a spine look interesting. And I've never gotten any kind of memorabilia that I've really wanted to display. Of course, I did collect tons of Nintendo memorabilia back when I was collecting everything Nintendo, but I wasn't really displaying it. I very quickly went from I don't have a lot of room to display this to I just need to start organizing and boxing up everything because it's so overwhelming an amount of collectible stuff. Moving on, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet has sold 20 million copies in 6 weeks. So, yeah. Despite being an incredibly buggy mess, which people complained about, it still seemed to sell pretty well. I guess the question is Sword and Shield. Where did that line up? Yeah. It's the 4th best-selling game of all time, which says Gold and Silver sold 23.7 million, Sword and Shield sold 25.6 million, and the original Red, Green, and Blue, which were 3 games, sold 31.1 million. So you get a diminishing return if you add a 3rd game. Probably get a diminishing return even selling 2 versions of the game. That's really a concept they should give up on and should have given up. The Arcana game not making it to the list as far as the top 4. And I guess if it's sold 20 million in 6 weeks, it still has a lot of room to grow. But let's go. Pikachu and Eevee sold 15 million so far. It's probably not going to sell much more. Mario Odyssey sold 5 more million. Sword and Shield, 5 more million. Zelda, Smash Brothers, Animal Crossing New Horizons selling quite a lot more, and Mario Kart selling quite a lot more. Which, this was probably an example of me not really understanding what games people are playing on the Switch much. As somebody who has the Switch and has only played 2 or 3 games on it in total, I would not have thought of the Switch as being a Mario Kart 8 Deluxe game above all else, or an Animal Crossing game above Mario Odyssey, or even Zelda being slightly better above Mario Odyssey. I still kind of feel like, too, that Mario Odyssey very possibly should have been a tie-in free game when you get to console. We really should go back to that concept of you getting, or I'm not sure that yeah, the NES definitely had bundles where it came with a free game. I'm not sure there was a way you could have bought the NES originally without getting at least one game, and maybe that wasn't the case for the Super NES, but we really should embrace that idea too. There should be something, even if it's just Tetris or a tiny small demo. Let's see here. Video Games Chronicle says the Nintendo Switch clears 122 million to outsell Game Boy and PlayStation 4, which, okay, so in a lot of ways, 10, 20, 30 years from now, I guess at that point, people are not going to even reference the Game Boy. It'll be a side note in the historical records to say the Game Boy was the first mobile console by Nintendo and sold extremely well until eventually being outpaced by the Switch. And you just get that sentence. Whereas up until this point, before, the Game Boy would have had a lot more historical relevance. But time is a cruel mistress and eventually erodes all things down to erodes boulders down to pebbles. I'm mixing 2 metaphors again there. Yeah. And so yeah, Game Boy is no longer as relevant as it once was once you get that all-time selling number and beat it. Although inherently also it's worth pointing out that Game Boy had to do it the hard way, because there was considerably fewer people playing video games when the Game Boy came out than now. Considerably fewer people buying consoles. It's a much worse statement as far as the Switch beating the PlayStation 4, considering how the PlayStation 5 has been extremely difficult to buy, particularly in Japan, and so the Switch is just succeeding on all ends. It can't always be that way. We can't be 5 years down the line and still playing Switch games and them still not having a Switch 2 in development or announced. Moving on, Take-Two says an imperfect release window may have contributed to slow Marvel Midnight Sun sales. Despite being a critical success, the game has underperformed at retail. I think I would agree with that, and also I think I would say it is incredibly refreshing to hear a company like Take-Two or any main publisher or developer come out and admit, hey, we screwed up the release windows. There has been a real lot of mistakes made as far as games getting released at the wrong time, games getting bundled so that they're competing within 2 or 3 weeks of other games, and then you get these dead zones of times like January. Almost every year there's no AA or AAA games getting released. If in January Marvel Midnight Suns had come out, it would have probably done way better. Mostly though, when you get into like the details here, that it seems like they're mostly trying to blame a delay. And so with them potentially, yeah, it was previously planned as an October, uh, uh, following a delay from the game's previously planned October launch window, it was released in early December. So, in a lot of ways, this may very well just be Take-Two blaming the developer, a publisher blaming a developer and saying, you forced us to delay because you didn't make the game as fast as we wanted. And this is somewhat of a valid argument that, yes, a publisher has to set a release date and the developer has to actually have a game to release at that release date, but very often the publishers set a release date that is ridiculously too early. But also it seems like a lot of developers are just slow programmers and kind of bad at their job. And I would believe that as somebody who has worked in IT before, I wouldn't be surprised if you are getting kind of bad programmers who are just passionate about video games working at video game companies instead of potentially getting the best of the best programmers you could find who can get paid a lot more and work a lot less hours at other jobs. And I don't know how you fix that, but it's something that potentially should be addressed. If there were better programmers making games, that'd be great. Now, arguably, what makes a bad programmer in this theoretical concept or conversation? Probably because they go out and drink too much. Probably because they fraternize with the employees and date around, sleep around, flirt with people. Probably because they are a little bit lazy and just not that good at programming, not efficient, not smart. Sometimes it is because they're obsessed about other things, whether that's because they're an SJW and just trying to make all the faces of the female characters fat and ugly and old looking. Sometimes it might just be they're obsessed with other things in general, or some other thing. Whereas very rarely, I think, in programming anywhere, you'll find somebody who's just passionate about programming and making the best code possible. That would be a real nerd's nerd, as it were. I might put myself in that category, but that very much might be self-flattery. And at the end of the day, I couldn't put myself in that category that well because I'm just not really qualified to be a programmer. I can program, have programmed certainly, but I just don't have enough of the style sheet programming training or experience more than anything that I couldn't come into a company and become a programmer. I could come into a company and be the director and understand what the programmers are doing to a well enough term to know whether they're doing a good job or not. But to actually write the code, I probably am pretty slow too, but compared to most people. Moving on. Modern Warfare 2 and Warzone 2 Season 2 read map has been published. Check that out on Video Games Chronicles if you're interested. Pikmin's 4 new trailers has confirmed a July release date. Pikmin, not Pikeman. I always do that. It has almost like a Yoshi's Woolly World effect on it. This is something that is starting to concern me a little bit on Nintendo games too, is that they've started to overly focus on doing different animation gimmicks and styles instead of just focusing on having more levels and more content, and that's probably leading towards a lot of Nintendo games, first party Nintendo games, feeling short or being short. It's not just that they feel, they are just shorter experiences than your average game. And it's not always the case that they are tight, short experiences where they've just cut the fluff and made a better experience. It's sometimes just that it would be nice if there was one extra world. A lot of Nintendo games, first party titles, would make a lot of sense if they were going to release DLC later on and make them bigger, but they don't really do that either. So looking at this Pikmin game, it looks like Pikmin. Good. I do want to play Pikmin. I don't know if you can play the old Pikmin games though. So, like if I was to go back and play Pikmin 1, can I do that on the Switch? Can I play 2? Can I play 3 before Pikmin 3? You'd almost certainly burn yourself out before July 21st release date if you did try to play all the Pikmin games as they were. Having recently played Kirby and the Forgotten World, which is very visually similar, and it's a empty world full of garbage with just a lot of details everywhere. Even the screenshot here scares me because I just question whether the Switch can have this many 3D polygons and textures on the world. And this little furriness on this bird scares me, and the little furriness on this dog scares me. Let's see, you have your original blue, yellow, red Pikmin, and then purple, and then a light blue. I don't think I've seen that in a black Pikmin. Yep. They may not be adding any more Pikmin in this game either. But for each game, you would think that there would be at least one new Pikmin. So Pikmin 1 had blue, yellow, and red, I think, and then Pikmin 2 could have added one, Pikmin 3 could have added one, and this could be Pikmin 4. It's new characters. Moving on, a new Samba de Amigo game has been announced for Switch. That's really shocking. It's a rhythm action game that's going to be released in June. Yep. People have talked about games like Samba de Amigo with nostalgia for a very long time, but they definitely didn't feel like there was a chance that they were ever going to get made again. It's developed by Sonic Team, published by Sega. The original Samba de Amigo was released in 1999 for the Dreamcast a year later. It was released in arcades in 1999 and then the Dreamcast a year later. So it's never been on a Nintendo console up until this point. Now Sega lost basically all of its arcade sales in Japan with COVID, and I don't think they expect the arcades, the Sega arcades, to come back because they've shut down the main big ones about a year ago or two. You do run into possibly some problems with something called Samba de Amigo, in that you have perhaps some cancel culture attempts might come about this from ill-informed SJWs, like, because you have a monkey here with castanets, I believe, but I can't see anything majorly offensive so far, and who knows. You get a little bit of protection when you have like an animal mascot character, particularly one that's been set that was already established. If this was just a humanoid character that was some kind of Mexican stereotype looking character, then you would have a problem. I guess the name of the game is Samba de Amigo Party Central. There might be a bit of a musical controversy as far as whether these games are actually sambas, even. But yeah, looking at this screenshot, it seems like most of the world is made up of like weird non-humanoid characters more than humanoid characters. Advanced Wars 1 plus 2 Reboot Camp will finally release in April. This one was the game that was delayed due to the Ukraine invasion and being a game that very much looks like a war game set in Ukraine. It originally was released on Game Boy Advance in 2001. They probably shouldn't have delayed it at all. It's probably a lesson to future game developers and publishers that if there is a major controversy like a war, you should probably, in war cases, expect that to go on for a long time. Nintendo, I imagine, hoped that the Ukrainian invasion would have just finished somehow in a matter of weeks, and then they could have released Advanced Wars 1 plus 2. But that obviously did not happen, so now they need to put the game out to try and recoup any money from it, or profit from it they can. Arguably, this might be the 7.5% of their stock value in a nutshell, if they had released this game when it was released, when it was scheduled to be released last year. That might have just pushed up their sales enough to balance their financials a little bit more. Moving on, the Splatoon 3 expansion pass will include a new single-player campaign. It will also let players relive a functional version of Inkopolis from the original Splatoon. So, interesting. That was one of the problems, is that Splatoon 1 either came out for the Wii U and nobody ever played it. Side order here is a new single player campaign. Or Splatoon came out very early for the Switch, and Splatoon 1 came out for the early for the Switch. The fact that we're even at Splatoon 3 though is probably a mistake. I would have thought a game that was more of a player versus player experience from Nintendo really should be a more living game as service type experience, which Nintendo has never done that before. But in the case of Splatoon, it would have made a lot of sense that you buy into Splatoon 1 with either a base price, or you buy season passes and it's a free to play game, or you get the first game on disc and then expansion passes to effectively give you the content of Splatoon 2 and Splatoon 3. It's very weird now to sell back a product that's not that old to people, and it's fairly Nintendo greedy to do that. And I'm not sure for certain whether what they mean as far as a functional version of Inkopolis isn't just you walking around what would have been the menu area and does not include any of the missions or the other gameplay content of the first game yet. So this very possibly is not really even worth that much if it is just a 3D small marketplace. Moving on, Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games are now on the Switch Online. It's ridiculous it's taken this long. Both of requires the expansion pack membership of the Nintendo Online service. These really should have been available day one on the Switch, and I severely expect there's nothing special about being able to play them on the Switch at all. Like, you're not getting any real special effect. Now, there are 4 shades of grayscale on any Game Boy game, and then a Game Boy Color adapter, or just putting a Game Boy game in a Game Boy Advance, would take those 4 shades of grayscale and then run it through a lookup table to convert those 4 shades of grayscale into 4 colors that kind of made it look like it was in color. I don't think it ever did anything more than that. And the lookup table would be like specific to each game. Uh, and if it didn't have anything in the lookup table, then it would probably just default to a color palette. So I don't know, but I'd imagine the Game Boy games will have the option, or by default be in color. As far as the Game Boy games they're adding, it's pretty much what you would expect. Easy things like Super Mario Land 2, which Nintendo owns outright. Link's Awakening DX makes a lot of sense. Tetris makes a lot of sense. Game & Watch Gallery. I don't know if Nintendo owns that Tetris rights outright. Then you have weirder things like Gargoyle's Quest, which I never even heard of, or Alone in the Dark. Metroid 2 Return of Samus for Game Boy. Wario Land 3, Kirby's Dream Land. Those all make sense. Except for Kirby's Dream Land, I think a remake for that is either coming or has already been released. So, weird to release the original game so close to that. Then Game Boy Advance games. Again, mostly first party Nintendo games here, except for this Kuro Kuro Kurin, which I have no idea what that is. Yeah. I don't recognize that at all. Link's Awakening DX for the Game Boy Color. They're saying Game Boy games, but they're including Game Boy Color games. If it was a Game Boy Color, then it would have had more color detail than just putting a old grayscale Game Boy in it. You can see how the artwork has been fairly consistent between even Game Boy games and Game Boy Advance games. Moving on. A Metroid Prime remaster is officially coming to Switch today. The long-rumored remaster is available at the eShop now. Finally, this rumored, quote-unquote, everybody knew it was in development, but people, I guess, wondered if it maybe was in development hell. Finally, this game is being released. This, I assume, means that they no longer are holding this back to buy more time for Metroid Prime 4. Or potentially this might be an indication too that Metroid Prime 4 just will not run on the Switch, and they're secretly working on their ways to build their lineup for whatever the Switch 2 is and have Metroid Prime 4 in that. These remastered images look pretty good. I guess it is also worth mentioning, though, that Nintendo just does not care about the Metroid series, and the Metroid series, of all the Nintendo first-party titles, is the least successful one. And they want $40 for the remaster, which is a fairly reasonable price compared to $70 for Breath of the Wild 2. Apparently a new Professor Layton game is in development. Professor Layton in the New World of Steam has been announced. Okay. Let's see. Zelda Tears of the Kingdom has a new trailer, collector's edition, and more. What is the price? It is $70. Yep, that's what I thought. $70. That's too much money for most games. When you look at Steam and Steam sales and you're buying games at $5 a pop or maybe $20, and they're not that old. Same article basically confirms Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is the first $70 Switch game. It's almost like they're trying to get some pride out of that announcement, the way this is being advertised, but I don't think Nintendo is inherently trying to do that. Like it does not. It's never going to sound good if Nintendo came out and said we were the first company to sell a first-party title game or a Nintendo game at $70. It's like that's not good advertising. Apparently both Baten Kaitos games are getting an HD remaster on the Switch. I have no idea what Baten Kaitos is. Let's see. HD versions. Let's just blur this so I can avoid getting content IDs struck by anything Nintendo related. If this blur still gets content ID'd, that really just highlights how much content ID, how effective it is at identifying anything and everything it possibly can allow Nintendo to claim as their own copyright. Even when advertisements like this are not copyrightable, trailers have never been copyrightable, commercials have never been copyrightable. Alright, looking at this video, Baten Kaitos looks to me like it's a Japanese RPG game of a very similar ilk to something like the Shin Megami Tensei series or the Final Fantasy series. There's a lot of monsters and a lot of fighting. Not really seeing much of anything else there. Yeah. Very little to say there. Moving on, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe next DLC includes a new Yoshi's Island track and Birdo as a character, which I don't know if adding Birdo as a new character does much. It seems like you have multiple colors of Birdos that you can play as. For a racing game, I imagine if you added a new character every now and then, and they were a way that was overpowered of changing the meta, changing the balance, you might have an idea there. Like, start with very balanced starter characters, and then throw somebody that's way overpowered, and then make somebody even more overpowered in the next expansion. And just have feature creep in a racing game. Like, ideally, yes, you'd have all your characters balanced, but that probably wouldn't sell anymore. I guess you can have different colored Yoshis too, so palette swaps seems to just be a thing. I'm hoping what happens here is that we get done with the Video Games Chronicles articles, and then there's just a lot of redundant Gamatsu articles because we've been going pretty long already. Here's a gallery of 27 new Tears of Kingdom screenshots, which a lot of light bloom going on here, and very kind of hard to see details of the actual textures and characters. So that's not particularly a great screenshot. The thing you would hope for, I think, in this game is that it being in the same world as Breath of the Wild, that you're not just climbing more mountains and having stamina problems. It seems like there's some hope here of maybe going into more caves and more underground stuff, because the underground sections in the first game were just the temples and they were very repetitive and not very big. I guess generally you still have to fight the enemies that would randomly spawn, but I wouldn't want to spend too much of that. The idea of the Blood Moon coming back and making enemies respawn and more dangerous seems to still be a thing. there is a weird question, I guess, to ask as far as how can this take place after Ganondorf has already been defeated. I guess Ganondorf is going to have to surprisingly not be defeated and come back, unless they're going to introduce a whole new enemy, which that would be weird for the Zelda series, who's established Ganondorf as always being the bad guy. Or Ganon, some kind of Ganon. You're still Blue Tunic Link, for the most part. This is just the new way Link looks. This is just the new way Zelda games play. I'm not 100% of a fan of it. You're not seeing big temples or castles, which is really what you would have wanted to see, because that's the main gameplay mechanic of Zelda games up until this point. Is you would have gone into a temple, and the temple would have had multiple rooms and a lot of enemies in the multiple rooms, and you would have gotten a specific item that synergized with a puzzle in that specific temple, and you would get that specific item. And yeah, that doesn't seem to be coming back. Also, the whole being in the air and jumping down may not really matter that much. Ideally, you would have wanted the air floating islands, whatever those are, to be the new temples and for them to be a lot bigger. But it doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. Like, there's a lot of mechanical tweaks you could certainly do around Breath of the Wild in a sequel to bring it back to feeling like a Zelda game. But I'm not sure they want Zelda games to be a top-down adventure experience anymore, or if they just want it to be a open world collectathon World of Warcraft simulator experience. That seems to be more what they're going for. Moving on, the first footage of Disney Dreamlight Valley's Lion King realm has been revealed. Every time I see this character, Nala, I am reminded that I never actually sat through The Lion King, because I just don't know that character. Totally blacked her out as far as a character. Barely know who Simba is. Which probably just means I'm not enough of a adult Disney fanboy, or a Disney fanboy at all, and I really don't care about Disney, that playing Dreamlight Valley would make much sense. Yeah, and of course Dreamlight Valley may be free to play, but it has a bunch of microtransactions in it, so it's really just not the experience. Ideally, I'm hoping Dreamlight Valley succeeds well enough so they keep making content for it, and then at some point they decide to change how it plays to the point where you can either play for free and get all the content, or you can just pay a one-time fee and get all the content, and the microtransactions get removed, and possibly a lot of the grinding to get microtransaction gems would get removed. Moving on to the Gematsu things, the Steam Next Fest was happening. It's now probably been overshadowed by the Nintendo Direct. So a game called Body Biteland Overclocked has a demo now available. We'll go through this quickly. A roguelike action game called Mist Rogue Mist in the Living Dungeons has a demo now available. Switch worldwide sales topped 122. Scarlet and Violet topped 20 million. We talked about that. Let's see, a game called Morbid the Seven Acolytes as a sequel to Morbid the Lords of Ire has been announced for PC, and apparently it's evolving from pixel art to 3D, which that is always a rough transition when you take a game that looks one way and then make a sequel that looks completely different. Looking at this screenshot, yeah, this looks like a 3D hack and slash game. So Let's see. Morbid, the Lords of Ire. Let's see if we click this. Can we see anything more on what that looks like? No, I guess what I would need to have done, it is Morbid, the Seven Acolytes would be the thing that I would need to search. So let's search that. Okay. Yeah. That is quite the transition as far as art styles. Yeah. This game is on my wish list, but you can see in the last 30 days it's only 63% positive, and overall it's only 76% positive. And a drastic shift in art style may not be enough to... It may lose your audience that you already have, and it may not be enough to convince people to play a sequel that they didn't play the original for. They're saying this is a Souls-like and Lovecraftian game, and I guess I might see some of that. I don't know, I might consider playing an 8-bit Souls-like game instead of playing Dark Souls. It'd be weird because it wouldn't be as relevant to play whatever that game would be, but it might make it a little bit easier as far as just positioning your character and not having the dodge roll as much if it is an 8-bit game compared to a 3D game where you have much more of a 3D plane in which dodge rolling and jumping back and getting out of the way of the attacks requires more spatial awareness. A game called Small Land Survival in the Wilds launches in early access on March 29th. It looks like you play as some kind of insect creature. They're saying it's an open world multiplayer survival game. You just don't have time to watch trailers today. It's a PC game. A game called Bramble the Mountain King launches on April 27th. The demo is now available for PC. This looks creepy and maybe a little too low polygon for its own good. Yeah, a lot of these demos though, it just doesn't really matter to look at the demos now. Either the games are going to release months from now and you'll see them then, or they just won't be good or relevant, or they don't release for years or ever. A co-op escape game called How to Escape has been announced for PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series, Switch, and PC, so basically everything. If one of these characters could play on a cell phone while the other played on the console, that would be an asynchronous style of play. But I don't know if that's really how this works. I wouldn't be surprised if both players actually just have to own a copy of the game, as that would be the default way things work here. You have some rough animation here, intentional kind of cartoony. We're not going to get the edges and lines right in the animations. This is undoubtedly inspired by something like Escape Academy, although Escape Academy I think you can do in single player mode. There is another game that did come out that was co-op, and obviously, yes, I have no co-op partners. I can't play any of these games and show them off. Plus, it's hard to criticize a game that is so built around how much fun you're going to have with your friends anyways. A game called No Longer Home is coming to the PS4 and PS5 on March 3rd. What kind of game is this? It says it's a adventure game. Alright, well, I'll leave it at that. It looks like it's probably some kind of narrative adventure game. See, Zordix establishes a maximum entertainment, maximum game, merge games, modulus games, and Just for Games parent company, currently in the process of acquiring the assets of Fun Labs. So we have a new Embracer group, effectively. That being said, the games they're working on are not things that I think I'd really be super interested in. Maximum Football, Small Land Survival in the Wilds, Big Truck Country, Is That Morbid, The Lords of Ire, Bramble the Mountain King, Project Veilus, and Project Z. So, yeah. Seems like a lot. Seems like a lot of merging with not that many games. So, although they do have a whole collage here of games either in development or already released. I think these are mostly in development, so this easily could be, there are only 8 games here, but they've mixed and matched screenshots from the 8 games. And if we look at this still, this screenshot is the same as this screenshot, and this is the same as this, and this is the same as this. So this column is the same as this column. This column is the same as this column. So then that just gives you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And noticeable, you can't even really see the things in the middle here on this screenshot. So if you're going to repeat anything, it probably would have been better to repeat these 2 columns instead of that. And so 8 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, columns, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yep. So 64 screenshots potentially from 8 different games or fewer. The Nintendo Direct being set for February 8th doesn't matter anymore. Raiden 2 launching on June 6th in North America and June 9th in Europe, or Raiden 3 Ex Makoto Mania X is the actual name of it. Free-to-play football simulator game Maximum Football has been announced for basically everything. Is it missing something here? PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4 Series, Xbox One, and PC. Yeah, it's missing the Switch. Yep. Visually, it looks good enough. Yep. And if I was going to play an American football game, something that is more of a simulator and more like the NES football game, which would have been the last football game I played was NES football. That would be more interesting to me, although I don't know how in the world you have a good experience with free-to-play elements in something like that. We already talked about the mixed reality Hot Wheels Rift Rally game, which is just the Mario Kart live circuit without the Mario license. A game called Scars Above has a gameplay overview trailer if you want to check that out at Gamatsu. Star Wars Jedi Survivor has 9 minutes of Koba gameplay if you want to check that out. A psychological horror restaurant management game called While We Wait Here has been announced for PC. The name, when I heard this, sounded interesting, and the visuals here sound interesting. That being said, I don't know if the gameplay mechanic really benefits you much. If it is this like psychological horror with a tornado on its way, and it's almost certainly a real experience that a lot of people in the United States have experienced, where if you're in Tornado Alley, a tornado might be dangerously close to you and you have to pull off the road and pull into a diner or a restaurant and just wait for cover. Although immediately you see some weirdness here. You have a stand-up refrigerator with very little food in it being shown in this screenshot for a diner, and you don't have like a walk-in refrigerator. looking at this, this is not really something that I think you would ever be allowed to have a diner like this. Like the carpet on the floor in the serving area, just empty walls, seemingly no ovens or places to heat up anything. Tiny little area here. Yeah, pretty big counter. Now, you would expect that there would be a walk-in fridge or freezer, and you would have everybody get into that walk-in fridge or freezer. At the very least, I would assume this door here is a bathroom, and you would have everybody huddle into the bathroom. Just being inside a building as a tornado is attacking you is not safe enough. All these windows are dangerous points in which a tornado could shatter glass and fling debris everywhere. So they didn't really think through the design of the building, but maybe that doesn't really matter that much. That's a lot to say about nothing, really. Pocky and Rocky Reshined is coming to PC on February 24th. This was a game that caught my eye as seemingly more relevant than I thought it would be. Apparently it's somewhat popular in Japan or Asia, since they remade it. It coming to Steam now opens up the door for me to potentially play it. It still would be one of those old school 8-bit games, and I'm not sure I could bother to care about it, and it still is a game that's probably not very relevant outside of the Asian countries. Blue Reflection Sun has a second overview trailer if you want to check that out on Gamatsu. The Forest of Drizzling Rain remake is now available in English, Simplified Chinese, Traditional Chinese, and Korean. It's a PC game. It was a Japanese only release in November. Looking at it visually, I'm not really seeing a lot here of interest. Seems to be kind of a creepy horror RPG game. Yeah. This might be one of those cases where the story is really good, but maybe in the translation the story won't be that good. Or it might be that this is just really an irrelevant game. Although, you should definitely take hope around any Japanese only release game being released on Steam, and then them bothering to translate it to more languages. You can see the ratings here are 100% positive for over 50 reviews. So there's something to be said around that popularity. And this wasn't on my wish list or follow list because it didn't support English, and now that that's changed, I guess I can put this on the wish list because it does have over 30 reviews. It's positive. I don't know if I'd ever really decide to buy this game. I guess you run into that problem though also, in that you only really get one bite at the announcement apple. So if you announce a game in November and it's Japanese only, most people are not going to get the second announcement when you support other languages. ST Shin Kamen Rider Rumble has local multiplayer gameplay available if you want to check that out on Gamatsu. Nacon Connect 2023 is set for March 9th, which maybe they finally will release or have a solid announcement release date for the Golem game. I don't know what this is. Maybe it's a Sniper Elite game. Don't know what this is, and obviously this is some kind of RoboCop game, which arguably I'm not sure a video game around RoboCop ever is going to work, because once you become a super powerful bulletproof cop, then you're having to fight other super powerful bulletproof robots for it to even matter. If anything, RoboCop 1 is more of a narrative experience than anything else, and so a Telltale game around RoboCop makes as much sense as a standard like first-person shooter RoboCop game, which almost certainly this is going to be a first-person shooter RoboCop game. City Skylines Remastered was announced for PS5 and Xbox Series. I kind of question if this is that much of a remastering as much as it's just a slight visual tweak for the newest generation of consoles. It is due out February 15th. Xbox Game Pass adds SD Gundam Battle Alliance, Mountain Blade 2, Bannerlord, Shadows Warrior 3 Definitive Edition, and more in February. Drift racing game Drift CE has been announced for the PS4, PS5, Xbox One, and Xbox Series. No Switch, no PC in that case. And yeah, looks like it's a racing game. Doesn't look amazingly visual. I'm always interested in perhaps a mechanic simulator game, but I imagine these screenshots aren't really going to let you tweak individual components in a racing game, in a racing car, as much as it's just an upgrade image animation. Wild Hearts Tame a World Gone Wild cinematic trailer is available if you want to check that out on Gamatsu. Rabby developers have announced a Metroidvania game called Tevi for the PS4, PS5, Switch, and PC. Noticeably, they are skipping the Xboxes, almost certainly because it's a Japanese company and Xboxes don't sell very well. Now, there is definitely a rabbit theme going on here as far as a anime girl with rabbit ears. Here you have a demon guy. Here you have kind of a fairy girl. And then here you have kind of a cat guy, not a rabbit here. As for the actual game, considerably different looking and different art style. It might be playable, certainly, but this teaser trailer is selling something that looks like an anime TV series, which is leaning heavily on tropes that probably would not inspire a very good anime TV series, even if you were going to try it. And then you look at the actual game, and it's just a real super deformed chibi characters in a flat pixely 2D screenshots. Kind of nothing, just a major letdown visually. Pikmin 4 launching July 21st, we already saw. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Expansion Pass Wave 3 launches February 15th. A lot of these things are coming out like within a week or so. So it definitely feels like this Nintendo Direct should have happened earlier, and very possibly was planned to have earlier. We already talked about the Samba de Amigo, Party Central. They have some different screenshots here compared to Video Games Chronicle. A couple different screenshots. Let's see. Ghost Trick Phantom Detective is coming to the PS4, Xbox One, Switch, and PC this summer. This is an old game getting ported. It's an old Capcom game. When was it originally released? It's kind of a puzzle game more than anything. And you can see it's just a bunch of puzzles and visual novel dialogue. Let's see. Reimagine music tracks. Revive story mode with a crisp comeback. When was this game originally released? Yeah. Ghost Trick Phantom Detective was originally released in 2010. I'm not sure for what. I think probably for the DS screen, and Nintendo DS, if I was to guess. Play as this ghost and you possess objects and try to solve, I think, your own murders. The story. There was a 3D first-person shooter called Geist for the Xbox 360 that had a similar idea, but in that case, you mostly would jump out as a ghost, take over the body of one of the enemies, and then start doing a bunch of first-person shooting. And I think you, for the most part, were stuck in the body of whoever you took over until they died, and then you took over another body. I don't think you could jump very quickly from one character to the other. And there were some puzzling elements too, as far as getting from one room to the other. I imagine a flatter 2D approach of jumping from one object to another and possessing objects might work better. Geist as a game really should have probably gotten a sequel. It's a game you could probably make a remake for right now. It would just come down to who owns the rights to it and whether they care. Level 5 announces a crime suspense RPG called Deca Police for the PS4, PS5, and Switch. This is more of a traditional release lineup for Japanese games. Just let's get it on the PlayStation and let's get it on the Switch or the Nintendo consoles. If I had more time, I'd watch this trailer, but I'm just going to skip it here. It does seem to be an alternate world theory here in this reflection of maybe more of a digital world, maybe more of a green world. There are trees here, but they're all dark, or they're bright green here. Natsumon 20th Century Summer Vacation has been announced. What's Natsumon? I gotta figure out what this is. Let's see, it says it's an adventure. Okay, so it's a soft CG Japanese boy, I would say. And he's got a whole bunch of Japanese family and friends, it looks like, and he seems to be just having a summer adventure running around. This doesn't seem like a character that I recognize from any anime or anything. Speaking of anime, there's a couple of mini-series of Case Closed / Detective Conan animes that Netflix just got. So maybe if I power through wasting my time watching Naruto, I would watch those. Although they're probably miniseries based on characters I don't even recognize in the Case Closed universe, since that's such a long-running series that has added characters over the years. And honestly, if it's not actually Detective Conan in this show, I'm not sure I'm super interested. Yep. Yeah, that just felt like a slice of life adventure game. Looked fine. Nothing special about it. Moving on, the Octopath Traveler 2 prologue demo is now available for PlayStation 4 and 5, Switch, and launches February 9th on the PC. Which is Octopath Traveler 1 on the PC? I guess it is. I think it potentially was added lately. There's two arguments to be made. One, to play Octopath Traveler 1 and 2 and never play any Final Fantasy game, even though Final Fantasy games are more relevant slightly. Or, bigger, never play a Square Enix games, because almost all Square Enix games are garbage. Instead, play something like the Atelier Marie remake, The Alchemist of Salzburg, being announced for the PS4, PS5, Switch, and PC. It's due out this summer. Now, of the long-running Atelier series, is Atelier Marie the first game in the series? You have a very soft pencil sketch animation of a character. This is definitely not the main character people are hyped around as far as the Atelier series. Let's see. Or the most recent character. I guess again, I want to see what a remake really would look like here. It seems like they're doing it all as CG in the actual gameplay mechanic. Shorter, I guess you'd call that chibi animation styles. And I don't know if that's what the game really looked like originally. And then in the cutscenes, it looks like they have live 2D visual novels cutscenes where the mouse seemed to be moving when they're talking. I had to blur that so that it doesn't get content ID'd by Nintendo. Yeah, that looked a lot better than I thought it might. But I really would have to figure out the whole Atelier series to figure out if this Atelier Marie is a remake of a game that was made 5 years ago or 10 years ago or longer or earlier. I only started paying attention to the Atelier series really when Rydo came out, the most recent, the second most recent series. Moving on, Square Enix announces a horror mystery adventure game called Paranorma Site, The Seven Mysteries of Hanjo for Switch, PC, iOS, and Android. It's interesting to see Square Enix try and make a multiple platform game going Switch, PC, iOS, and Android, although PC is probably the outlier here in that this is mostly just a mobile game being ported to the Switch and PC. This is a very flat, old school animation looking style. We might be seeing a bit of a resurgence of these animation styles coming back, at least for horror games. But yeah, this wasn't a remake of an old game. This is a new game. But yeah, this might be a push to get away from the kawaii and moe animation styles in general. The Western world may have bullied the Japanese animators enough to no longer want to do that style, and instead they're falling back to animation styles of the 80s and 70s even. Moving on, we love Katamari Reroll Plus and Reroll Plus Royale Reverie has been announced for the PS4, PS5, Xbox One, and Xbox Series, Switch, and PC. It's due out on June 2nd. I wonder if this is an expansion to the already released on Steam Katamari game, or if this is a different Katamari game. I know there are several games, and it seems like we're getting to the point where there might be multiple remasters of Katamari games. It really is a game where if you've played one, you've probably played them all, so whichever ones you can get on PC are probably good enough. As a concept of having a sticking ball that connects to and attaches itself to everything it touches, there's only so many times you could play a game around that gimmick before you get bored. A game called Sea of Stars launches August 29th. The demo is now available for Steam. Looks like it's probably a 8-bit pixely JRPG type game. It's turn-based RPG according to Komatsu. Etrigan Odyssey Origins Collection has been announced for Switch and PC, due out on June 1st, which looks like it's probably just a dungeon crawler. The animation looks kind of nice here, but yeah, it doesn't look like much of a thing. This is the kind of game, interesting, they have the Phantom Thief character from the Persona series. This is the kind of game, though, that would make sense if you were stuck on a commuter train or a bus or something and you're just going to play this every day to and from school or work. Playing something like this on a Nintendo DS where it doesn't really have enough power to do anything else. But in modern times, in modern days, there's another Persona character here, and here's a Shin Megami Tensei character. Yeah, looking at this interface, it's just like you would not want to do this on a modern gaming platform or even on a cell phone. Yep. There's a whole bunch of DLC characters we're talking about here and promoting. Yeah. There probably is something wrong with the idea of just announcing your game and then immediately having a bunch of DLC characters from other games to promote it, but I think they pretty well know that the product they're trying to sell here is not that good. These might have been remakes of older games, which might justify some of it, but not much of it. Like, it does kind of seem like they are HD remakes of very old games, but I don't think these are relevant enough games that you would want to go back and play them just because they're in HD, or that you would have even wanted to play them when they were first released. We already talked about Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp launching April 21st. Metroid Prime Remastered announced for Switch, now available. Physical editions will be out March 3rd, so we get a little bit of extra detail there. I definitely would lean towards buying physical editions. Although I have Metroid Dread and I haven't even opened it and played it yet, so I probably should play that. Metroid Dread is the best, most successful, most selling Metroid game so far. I really would like to play these games, but in particular I can't make content around it, can't put it on YouTube without it being copyright claimed. So, plus I'd need a capture device of some sort to get it out of a Switch, or an emulator to play it perfectly, which I'm not sure you can emulate a Switch game perfectly with my hardware, or any hardware. Yeah, I could see definitely buying this just out of nostalgia, maybe a year or two from now. Let's see. Moving on. Master Detective Archives Rain Code launches June 30th, which this is from the makers of Danganronpa, but this time going in a different direction and putting it more of a mature feeling and more of an open world feeling, instead of having a bunch of students trapped in a school killing each other off, which is what happened in Danganronpa 1, and there being a mystery as to why that was happening. There's more ghost elements. That being said, this character here has like a kind of bunny hair clip, which I feel like is an homage to at least one of the characters from Danganronpa, and several of these characters feel like they might be homages. What would be fairly disappointing is if this game played exactly the same as Danganronpa, or even close to the same as Danganronpa, or just had a bunch of characters being introduced to be killed off. That being said, I don't think it's going to be quite like that, but it may still have a lot of the similar mechanics of just wandering around open worlds, talking to a bunch of people, events triggering at specific times in specific rooms. There may not be a core you're going to be attacked and you're going to fight gameplay mechanic in it that you traditionally would expect in video games. Yeah, they're calling it an adventure game, for whatever that means. We already talked about Bat and Kaidos remaster being announced for Switch. Fantasy Life I, the Girl Who Steals Time, has been announced for Switch. Which, again, most of these are just teaser trailers. That seems it. So you've got chibi 3D models, bunch of characters wandering around, giant world. A lot of these I feel like are probably just trying to be like Animal Crossing. Yep, this definitely feels very similar to Animal Crossing. Yeah, honestly, I think people only have enough interest in their hearts for one Animal Crossing game, and that's Animal Crossing itself. Professor Layton in the world of news, the new world of Steam has been announced. Let's see if there's any more screenshots. No, there's a trailer here, but I'm not going to watch it. And then our final Gamatsu article for today is Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom second trailer and screenshots, which we'd already talked about. So we're getting more screenshots. You can see a lot of gliding going on and different skins on the glider. Seems like maybe there will be dragons flying around, which that probably doesn't change too much. Yeah. I suppose you can make a sequel where there is no Ganon in this game. Although this looks like this might be Ganon here. A Ganon of some sort. But yeah, there could be like no Ganon in the game and you're just cleaning up a world full of wild creatures. He has a vehicle of some sort. And he has a flying vehicle of some sort, and you best look so far as the floating islands. I know there's this whole like motorcycle you get at the very end. You have a golem of some sort. That wouldn't be terrible if they did make it more of a Shadow of Colossus type game where you're wandering around taking out big giant monsters throughout the entire land. That was kind of the idea with the 3 or 4 mythic beasts in Breath of the Wild, but yeah, that was not quite close enough to Shadow of the Colossus for its own good. Yeah, a lot of collectibles and things like that. I really question whether introducing electric type technology or magical technology to the Zelda universe benefited it at all. It seems like they just wanted to do that for no reason so they could have a motorcycle. There's obviously an obsession around motorcycles in somebody who is high up and makes decisions at Nintendo, because they added a motorcycle to replace horses in Zelda. They added motorcycle like Pokemon in Pokemon Violet and Scarlet. That's 2 major games. There's probably a few other games with motorcycles in it from first party Nintendo games, if I were to, of recent times. There's a scooter in Mario Odyssey, not so much a motorcycle, though. Alright. Well, I was going to warn this, but I didn't speak fast enough as far as... Now let's look at the games on Steam, and since today is Wednesday, we probably will see some adult games. We really haven't been seeing that many adult games recently. So we've seen only maybe 3 or 4 during this whole Steam Next Fest, and so it felt like they were being held back so that they didn't conflict with it. So we start with the very first game on Steam. It's called Moving In With My Stepsister, and you have this like blonde, like 2D. It's kind of more of the colorful anime art style with the character, and she is doing something sexual in almost every picture. She's scrubbing the back of the stepbrother in a more Japanese style bathroom. This game is rated very positively at 80% of 80 reviews. And it doesn't look like it's just a visual novel either. There's a whole cooking mini game that's being shown here also. It definitely feels like it delivers on that. The stepsister, stepbrother, siblings, incest trope, very popular amongst porns. It's English, and it says it supports a bunch of other languages, but noticeably Japanese is not even above the fold, and Chinese wasn't above the fold. So this kind of feels like this is more of a Western game being developed, just more in that flat 2D art style. So I really wouldn't call this more of a hentai adult game anyways, even though it's definitely leaning on that trope. This does feel like it's the Western developers come in here and added an actual gameplay mechanic. Now this puts me in a weird position because it's an adult game. I guess I just put it on the wish list, even if I were to buy it, I really couldn't make content around it and show it off. Nobody's going to be interested in watching a blurred video of footage for an hour or two, however long this game goes. It's probably not that long. But this is like one of the extremely rare examples of a good adult game showing up in the adults only section on Steam, which most people don't ever even see. You have to go into your preferences and allow it. Yep. Interesting. The developer's name is in like Asian writing, so it probably was developed by an Asian company, but doesn't seem like it's solely targeting an Asian country. Alright, moving on, we have a butterfly matching game, so a swing in just a completely opposite direction. Of course, there's not a lot to say about that, so we move forward. City ambulance car driving. I don't know if there's anything special enough about driving an ambulance that would make you want to play a simulator around that, so I'm going to say no. Full Moon Kit looks like it's just an asset flip game. Avenger for apparently the C64, Commodore 64, Commodore PC, or Spectrum. This is very possibly a game that did come out. It says it was originally released in 1986. Alright, well, I will give that a YouTube short and put it on the follow list. Daily Dadish. I'll make a YouTube short around this. I've probably been a little cruel about excluding platforming games because I don't particularly like platforming games and not made enough YouTube shorts around that. Multiplayer. Misspelled, I believe. Werewolves. Doesn't look like anything. Next we have another adult game called Cockville, which is a gay guy Farmville clone. Which, honestly, not a terrible thought either. I guess the real question here is it's free to play, so the price is right. Doesn't look like there's... Yes, there are in-app purchases, and that's the offensive part about this game to me. If anything, porn versions of games that were fairly popular, like Farmville being a little bit of a weird choice, because I doubt there's a lot of overlap as far as gay guys and fans of Farmville. I would think it would be just old people that play Farmville on Facebook, not gay guys trolling for other gay guys. So maybe a mistake there. Maybe this really is just a joke game and not that good. But the thing that really eliminates it is the fact that it's full of in-app purchases. When I would prefer a game like that to just be a flat fee and then do a low effort parody of Farmville. You also run into a problem where Farmville was a game that you could just play non-stop for years on end, and an adult game is going to very traditionally be a very short experience, 15 minutes to 2 hours, not 15 weeks to 2 years. Your Train doesn't look like anything. Project Hedra just looks like an asset flip type survival game. Actually, it doesn't even look like an asset flip game. It just looks like a low polygon survival game. I call too many things asset flips when just that's my default insult. You Can Domino. I'll give that a short and follow it. Hug Survivor. I guess this is supposed to be like Vampire Survivors. This is funny enough to get a YouTube short, but it's probably not a game you really would want to play. Nadar, the Grimdark Deck Builder, mostly positive. This is already on the fall list. Interesting. Did this come out of early access? I'd have to say probably. So I'll move this over to a wish list and make a YouTube short around it under the assumption that it came out of early access. There's not a good way to find out if that's true or not. Drift Experience Japan is already mixed reviewed and doesn't look that good. IOUA looks like absolute garbage. Scorchlands. Is this a tower defense game? No, it looks more like it's a colony sim game. I'll give that a follow. Street Lords. I guess I don't really need to announce whether I'm going to make a YouTube short around something or not. I should just focus on saying whether something makes it to the fall list or not, or gets to the wish list. Conjuring Reveal. Is this a VR game? This is one of those student projects, I think. SMU Guildhall. Well, they're not actually advertising it as a student project. Okay, I'll give it a chance. Something weird about SMU Guildhall also, in that looked like a Chinese game, but SMU Guildhall you would think would be not in China. Could be though. SMU might stand for something completely different that you wouldn't even think about, like South Mandarin University or something like that. Mandarin being the name of the Chinese language, not a city in China. I don't know a name of a city in China to make a better example. This is like the exact same game. Gloria Victis Medieval MMORPG. Gloria Victis Medieval MMORPG. New Beginning servers launched. It's like they relaunched their servers. This is one of the things Steam has told them that not do anymore, is not put a announcement in these pictures like this. Like, this is not allowed on Steam anymore. Of course, there's not really a way to report a picture so much, and maybe that is just general guidance, but yeah, they got tired of people putting awards and descriptions all in the thumbnail and making the thumbnails look even worse. Alright, let's see, is this an adult game? Doesn't look like it. Metaverse. I don't know what it is, but it looks weird enough to maybe do a short on. Beaver Clicker. Not visually polished enough for a joke game. Obviously the name is basically a joke. Trojan, trying to look a little bit, I think, like Tron visually and to have name confusion. But I don't think there's enough of a visual polish here for a top-down stealth game. Asian Food Cart Tycoon, not polished enough. Balloon Man is a joke game. Old Tunnel. I don't think there's enough variety in this game for me to give it a chance. It's just the exact same screenshot over and over again. Let's see, Phoenix Nightmare. Looks like we've got too much dark screenshot syndrome for its own good, so I'm going to say no to that. It's kind of funny, you have the kind of colorful image. Yeah, another one of these pipe games. There's far too many of these on Steam. They don't look terrible, but really only needed to make 1 or 2 pipe games, if not 20 plus, it feels like. XL, if that's Roman numerals, would mean that's the 40th one they've released. This one might be something, this Medorica. I remember them announcing it, but it might be nothing too. Jigsaw puzzle lovers. I think I'm going to still stand fairly firm as far as not making YouTube shorts around jigsaw puzzle games. I'm going to make an exception for this one because this actually looks like it might be a decent jigsaw puzzle game anyways. But overall, most of them are not even jigsaw puzzle games. They're square slide puzzle games. And even if it is a jigsaw puzzle game, it has like 8 puzzles in it. And none of it is good. I don't know if something happened here that I'm getting a lot of duplicate tabs or what. Does this support English? No. So, Blonde Lady seems to be the name of this, but yeah, it doesn't even look good enough anyways to put on a follow list, even if it did support English. Fight and Crush. Not quite polished. There's just a very high standard as far as fighting games, and it's practically impossible for any indie developer to make a fighting game. Ultimate Legends. Yeah, the animation here doesn't look good enough. Wipe Factor. Looks like it's trying to be a Fortnite clone of some sort. It's parkouring and physical obstacles instead of Fortnite, which in all fairness, a Wipeout game where it's a Fortnite like battle royale type experience, or it's a team-based battle royale. Well, that wouldn't be a battle royale then. Like team-based elimination around physical activities. Not a terrible thought. I don't know if you do that particularly in a video game as much as maybe you do that as a TV show. Alright, next we have another adult game called Sex with Succubus, which is succubus. Although it really just is a 3D CG image of a lady with some horns attached to it. There's no scales. I'm not seeing a tail really. Not seeing wings. Seems like there might be some kind of room decoration element to the room. And then there seems like there's maybe a torture dungeon mini game that has been animated completely differently and way worse compared to the adult sections. She has horns coming out of her heads, but she also has like bumps on her heads that are more flesh-covered horns. Yeah, and then there's just this weird torture minigame. Like, oddly, I would really argue that this is a terrible way to depict a succubus. There's a lot of different ways you could depict a succubus, and I would call it a succubus. I'd say this looks almost more just like some kind of anthropomorphic ram, because it looks like they just have ram horns. And they're super focused on the single person, like, porn shots. There's no other character. Doesn't look like it's likely even animated. They probably are just stills. And then the minigame, which would be the one thing that might have interested me, looks absolutely awful. Anyways, they're selling it for $6.49. Says it has English full audio and then supports all 100 plus of the other languages on Steam. And this is typically what I expect from a... She definitely doesn't have a tail or wings also. This is typically what I expect to see from the adult games. It's pretty low quality, low content endeavors, just trying to sell to a very niche audience for a fairly high price at $6.49, although that's not that expensive. Next we have Prisma Puzzle Prime, which just looks like a puzzle game, maybe a laser game. I'm going to be generous and give that a chance when I probably shouldn't. Next we have a horror game called Outstand. Well, I was going to at first look dismiss this, but there might be something to this. Inherently, we're running into the problem where horror games more and more are getting better and better with their visuals, to the point where it's becoming almost impossible to dismiss a horror game based on its screenshots, because they all look good. Or most of them look good. Here's an example of one that does look bad and definitely has the dark screenshot syndrome of just most of the screenshot being in the darkness. Let's see, Pigskin Punter. This is a low effort game trying to, I assume, sell during the whole Super Bowl. I doubt there are very many people who are American football fans that come to Steam and buy American football random games. I doubt there's even 2 people in the world that would do that. If you are an American football fan, you would get Madden and you would play Madden every year, and that would be all you would do. This NRG doesn't quite look polished enough to interest me. Top Race doesn't look like anything. Here we have a game called Drawing from Memory. So this is a party game where you're drawing things and then people are, I guess, trying to guess which picture they like. So it's a party game. Arguably, you should instead play the You Don't Know Jack Party Pack. Oh, Jack Party Packs are what they're called. Yeah. Instead, you would get more games in a single Jack Party Pack instead of paying $5 for this. This is odd in that it supports English and Dutch only as the languages. Next we have a visual novel called Sunrider 4's The Captain Return. Well, actually it says it's a turn-based tactics game with just visual novel cutscenes. Well, there might be something here, so we'll give that a chance. Yep, and we're almost done. Good. I was starting to get worried that a lot of games had come out over the past couple days, like more than normal. Slime Catcher doesn't look like anything. And see, then that was the last game, so now we're at the GameDeveloper.com articles. We've been going 3 hours and 20 minutes. I probably shouldn't mention that. This Finnish studio, Fingersoft, is letting staff work shorter 6-hour days. Those who opt in will earn 90% of their first full salary. And Fingersoft claims the new option is a better alternative to the 4-day work week, which maybe in Finland the 4-day work week was standard, but it's definitely not the standard in like the United States, which is a 5-day work week at 80 plus hour or 8 plus hours each day, 20 plus hours a week. You might have to do the calculation there. 6 hours a day for 5 days, which is, I assume, what they're trying to push for, is 35 hours, whereas 4 days at 8 hours, you assume it's 8 hours, would be 32 hours. So you might be actually working more if it is actually for 5 days. I guess if it was 6 hours times 4 hours. The bigger story certainly is that people are going to work less and less hours. It's going to create problems though, because a lot of wives can't stand their husbands for even 2 days on the week. A lot of parents can't stand their kids for even 2 days on the week. And so there will be an adjustment as far as what are you doing with that extra time. A lot of people cannot stand just doing nothing for one extra day on the week. Although you don't have to do nothing. You can certainly just work out or catch up on things you've been planning on doing. But yeah, I think 6 hours a day with one extra day is probably a bad idea. 6 hours a day and still working only 4 days a week, probably a decent idea. At a certain point it does get kind of ridiculous, but that point is really if you were working a half day. If you came in at 8 in the morning and then you left for lunch and did not come back for lunch, most people have experienced that at least once or twice in their life, and that's fairly manageable. But to come in at 8 in the morning, work 4 hours, eat lunch, come back, work for another 2 hours, that doesn't really make sense. It would make more sense to do 3 hours than an hour lunch than 3 hours, which depending on what kind of work you're working on. It's weird to even have like salaried employees working a specific number of hours for a video game company anyways. Moving on, UK regulators knocks back at Microsoft Activision Blizzard deals, publishing the provisional findings of its investigation into the merger. The CMA said it believes the move will harm Microsoft's rivals and result in a substantial lessening of competition, which honestly I don't know if I really disagree with that, but still the assumption is very much is that this is going to happen no matter what anyways. Krafton has opened a AAA studio in Montreal to adopt a Korean fantasy novel series. The PUBG Battlegrounds maker hopes to expand the studio significantly over the next 3 years. Which Korean fantasy novel series would be, I guess, the question. Let's see. Are they mentioning the name of it? No, they aren't. I don't know. Like, yes, there have been some manga Korean stories that have really been popular. not a ton of them. But if it's not a manga, I wouldn't know about it at all if it's just a proper fantasy novel series. So, yeah, more information needed, and a lot of confidence, frankly, needed too, that the PUBG Battlegrounds creators could make a AAA game of any sort, and particularly when they're saying they have to significantly scale up and expand and hire new people to do it. So who knows what those new people are capable of making. Let's see. The former Fall Guys art lead co-founds a new studio called Electric Saint. We are about crafting dynamic worlds that are full of light and life. Now here's the problem with having two people in the picture. Which of these two people is the person that was the art lead? It says Anna Hollenreich, so you would assume it's this girl, but then why not crop out this guy in the picture to fix that? Why not have GameDeveloper.com do that, or find a better, possibly more professional picture than an art lead in a high fashion streetwear outfit? I might throw out a possibly baseless accusation that there's not as many individual solo pictures taken of women, that they tend to want to be taken in groups or with at least a boyfriend of the time. Arguably, though, I would say that's probably baseless and just a thought I'm having that with no actual science behind it. I think most people probably need to get photos of themselves taken once in a while, probably not every year, but the whole school, every school, we're going to take your photo and it's going to be more professional and look somewhat decent. It's not a terrible thought to have that done, particularly in the game industry. I think every employee probably should be forced to take a professional photo when they enter a company, and just for the company's use and for your own personal use, but every couple of years too, just having everybody take individual professional photos. Yeah, that can just have more photo shots you can show. The other person, let's see, was Pavel Mikalajovic, and so this might be Pavel Mikalajovic, but who knows. Like, looking at this picture though, it does kind of feel like you've got maybe like a Russian Slav feel to him, if not her too, or these two are dating, sleeping around, and they formed a company that way. Of course, again, that's baseless assumption. You see a guy and a girl in the picture, you assume they are either brother and sister, or more likely dating or romantically interested. But yeah, regardless, not very professional photos. You see that time and time again. Yep, there's something to be said for the ugly power suits that you see in female politicians, where they have to basically dress like a man to be treated even anywhere close to the way a man would treat another man, or be respected by a lot of other women. Moving on, Kit Fox breaks down Dwarf Fortress's success story with a 600,000 sales in 2 months. This looks like this is more of an interview from GameDeveloper.com. But yeah, 600,000 sales is a pretty big number in 2 months. It's not amazing for a AAA game by any means, but it's a big number. It's nothing to scoff at. Blizzard is disabling Twitter integrations from World of Warcraft. You can't tweet that anymore. I assume this is because Twitter is collapsing. I wouldn't be surprised if you just slowly start to see a lot of apps removing Twitter as an option to share with. I think we really have hit a point where people are going to abandon Twitter before they find a new place to abandon it to. I'm in a weird position even with like Gmail and email at this point. It's like nobody emails me anything anymore. I don't email people. I barely use my cell phone number even. So like if tomorrow email stopped being a thing and cell phone number stopped being a thing, it would be kind of inconvenient to not be able to call people and I guess only text people through some other service. But I could probably live with that and not being able to email people. At a certain point, email and text should have been interconnected always anyways. That it's kind of crazy that the text system does not allow you to email somebody at the same time in the same app. Moving on, Scopely has added Zynga's Eric Wood as a new Senior VP of Publishing. With Wood's experience in partnerships, Scopely wants to take his knowledge and expand its reach to more brands. Scopely is a developer, I think, of a Star Trek game. They created Marvel's Strike Force, Yahtzee with Buddies. Then why are they using a screenshot of Star Trek ships? Eric Woods also worked for Activision Blizzard, Disney, and EA in the past. So it sounds like a good hire for Scopely, assuming he's not a toxic person, whatever that really means. Legend of Zelda will be launched at $70. We already talked about that. Then we've just got a fall list here. Cleanup of some games. Let's see. Got a game here from 2019 called Cat Lady, not to be confused with The Cat Lady. That is 88% positive, but still early access from 2019, so I'm going to take it off the fall list. It's never coming out of early access at that rate. Cat Herders, I will give more time to since it just came out in November. Cat Gets Medieval. We're going through these alphabetical, so that's why these are all cats. I think we would say no to this. It's just too low polygon for its own good. Early access 2021. Also probably not coming out of early access. Cat Follow Me, I'll give more time to. Although if this came out in February of 2022, it's not likely that it would ever get 30 reviews, which is the minimum. Catfish Island, not really what you would expect when you hear the word catfish. That can leave also, because it's just not relevant. Cat Cafe Manager, on the other hand, is very positive. So I'll put that on the wish list. Although in all fairness, I'm not sure I really would want to play a simulator running a cat cafe. But I could see going down that path. And then Castle Reborn needs more time. Castle on the Coast. It's kind of an odd, kid-friendly looking game. 97% positive. 3D platformer. Yep, it follows the rules as far as mob rule. Over 30 reviews, mostly positive, so it makes it to the wish list. Now, inherently, things in the wish list doesn't mean I actually will buy it. I've actually not bought in the game in a very long time. Let's see, Castle in the Sky has no reviews, so I'll get rid of that. Castle Flipper, being a parody on the House Flipper genre, not being well received. And this is the beauty of putting a bunch of games on the follow list without really putting a lot of effort into it to evaluating the games, is you can just wait until the public reviews a game and see how they feel about it. This castle constructor doesn't look good enough though. I'm gonna say no to that, even though it is mostly positive. It's in the 70s and it only barely has 30 reviews, so I can be a little bit more critical there. Alright, well then, let's set up bring back the Yu-Gi-Oh! There we go. And set up a live, spectate this. I'm going to quickly scroll through my Twitter feed, which there might be quite a few announcements as far as Nintendo Direct announcements. Yeah. It's like... There's... Gamatsu was posting announcements 40 minutes ago. So... Like, just quickly, we'll talk about more of this, I guess, on Friday. A free-to-play 3 vs 3 foot brawler called Omega Strikers is coming April 27th for the Switch, PC, and iOS and Android. Sniper Rangers on the chat saying yellow. Momotaro Jinsei World has been announced for Switch. This is a Japanese, I think, Mario Party type board game. Sniper Rangers saying, I'm coming here to say goodnight. Yep. I started late tonight. Tron Identity adds a Switch version and launches in April. First I've even heard of a game called Tron Identity. The Dead Cells DLC Return to Castlevania launches March 6th. The Don't Nod announces a unique narrative experience called Harmony: The Fall of Reverie. A fashion influencer game called Fashion Dreamer has been announced for Switch, which, being a fashion influencer and game and then having this art style doesn't look particularly good. Let's see if there's anything else that we need to really talk about. Actually, that may be it. If anything, the fact that there really were only 5 more Gamatsu tweets and that's it for my feed, I think I would have to start to raise the red flag and say it does feel like Twitter something's going wrong with Twitter. There's just fewer and fewer tweets making it into the feed. And not every single tweet here is from Gamatsu, but a severely large amount of them are. If it is a case that there just was a rumor that convinced a lot of people to make their accounts private on Twitter, that could certainly have reduced the number of people I'm following down to less than double-digit numbers, potentially. I feel like, if not last year, the year before, or maybe the year before that, YouTube TV had an ad on the Super Bowl, and everybody's talking about Super Bowl ads at the moment as the Super Bowl is about to happen. I wonder if we see any YouTube TV ads this year, or if they realize that probably is advertising to the absolute wrong audience. Alright. But yeah, it doesn't look like there's anything else as far as news that needs to be talked about. And that's fine. I'm gonna probably try and call it an early night myself. If I could actually just fall asleep right now instead of staying awake till 8 or 9 in the morning, that would be great. Alright, well, I want to make a special thank you to everybody on the chat who talked. We got a lot of interaction today for my chat compared to most streams where there's nobody chatting, or Sniper Ranger comes in and says hello, and more recently he's been doing that, and I appreciate that. Even a single comment really helps these streams get more views. But yeah, special thanks for that. That's going to be it for this stream, though. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. Down below in the description there are social media links. There's also a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and get me a game off my wish list to support me that way. I'm trying to change the ending to make it less wordy, but I'll have to figure out the perfect way to phrase that and train my brain to say it that way over and over again. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.